We'll start for Captain Lopez.
Butch, stop watching TV a second.
Carl Spinner.
Yeah?
We've got a special visitor.
Spinner! Spinner!
Yeah. Do you remember when I told you your daddy died in a POW camp? Well, this here is Captain Coons. He was in the POW camp with Daddy.
Hello, little man. Boy, I sure heard a bunch about you. See, I was a good friend of your dad's. We were in that Hanoi pit of hell together over 5 years. Hopefully, you'll never have to experience this yourself, but when two men are in a situation like me and your dad were for as long as we were, you take on certain responsibilities of the other. If it had been me who'd not made it, Major Coolidge, you'd be talking right now to my son, Jim. The way it turned out, I'm talking to you. Butch, I got something for you. This watch I got here was first purchased by your great-grandfather during the First World War. It was bought in a little general store in Knoxville, Tennessee. Made by the first company to ever make wristwatches. Up till then, people just carried pocket watches. It was bought by Private Doughboy Orion Coolidge on the day he set sail for Paris. This was your great-grandfather's war watch, and he wore it every day he was in that war. And he'd done his duty, went home to your great-grandmother, took the watch off, put an old coffee can, and in that can it stayed till your granddad, Dane Coolidge, was called upon by his country to go overseas and fight the Germans once again. It's time they called it World War II. Great-grandfather gave this watch to your granddad for good luck. Unfortunately, Dane's luck wasn't as good as his old man's. Dane was a Marine, and he was killed, along with all the other Marines at the Battle of Wake Island. Granddad was facing death. He knew it. None of those boys had any illusions about ever leaving that island alive, so 3 days before the Japanese took the island, your granddad asked a gunner on an Air Force transport named Wanaki, man he'd never met before in his life, to deliver to his infant son, we'd never seen in the flesh, his gold watch. 3 days later, your granddad was dead, but Wanaki kept his word. After the war was over, he paid a visit to your grandmother, delivering to your infant father his dad's gold watch. This watch. This watch was on your daddy's wrist when he was shot down over Hanoi. He was captured, put in a Vietnamese prison camp. He knew that if the gooks ever saw the watch, it'd be confiscated, taken away. The way your dad looked at it, this watch was your birthright. He'd be damned if any slope's going to put the greasy yellow hands on his boy's birthright, so he hid it. In one place he knew he could hide something, his ass. 5 long years he wore this watch, up his ass. Then he died of dysentery. Give me the watch. I hid this uncomfortable hunk of metal up my ass 2 years. Then, after 7 years, I was sent home to my family. And now, little man, I give the watch to you.
White power, 1, 2, 3, 4!
Some sharp lawyering. But I'm not going to read it. I'm here to apologize. I am young and I am inexperienced. But you cannot hold Carl Lee Haley responsible for my shortcomings. You see, in all this legal maneuvering, something has gotten lost. And that something is the truth. Now, it is incumbent upon us lawyers not to just talk about the truth, but to actually seek it, to find it, to live it. My teacher taught me that. Let's take Dr. Bass, for example. Now, obviously, I would have never knowingly put a convicted felon on the stand. I hope you can believe that. But what is the truth? That he's a disgraced liar? And what if I told you that the woman he was accused of raping was 17, he was 23, that she later became his wife, bore his child, and is still married to the man today? Does that make his testimony more or less true? What is it in us that seeks the truth? Is it our minds? Or is it our hearts? I set out to prove a black man could receive a fair trial in the South, that we are all equal in the eyes of the law. That's not the truth, because the eyes of the law are human eyes, yours and mine, and until we can see each other as equals, justice is never going to be even-handed. It will remain nothing more than a reflection of our own prejudices. So until that day, we have a duty under God to seek the truth. Not with our eyes and not with our minds, where fear and hate turn commonality into prejudice, but with our hearts. Well, I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. I'll tell you this story. I want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to yourselves. Go ahead. Close your eyes, please. This is a story about a little girl walking home from the grocery store one sunny afternoon. I want you to picture this little girl. Suddenly a truck races up. Two men jump out and grab her. They drag her into a nearby field. And they tie her up. And they rip her clothes from her body. Now they climb on. First one, then the other. Raping her. Shattering everything innocent and pure. A vicious thrust. In a fog of drunken breath and sweat. And when they're done, after they've killed her tiny womb, murdered any chance for her to bear children, to have life beyond her own, they decide to use it for target practice. So they start throwing full beer cans at her. They throw them so hard that it tears the flesh all the way to her bones. And they urinate on her. Now comes the hanging. Neck. And sudden blinding jerk. She's pulled into the air and her feet and legs go kicking and they don't find the ground. The hanging branch isn't strong enough. It snaps and she falls back to the earth. So they pick her up, throw her in the back of the truck, drive out to Foggy Creek Bridge, pitch her over the edge. She drops some 30 feet down to the creek bottom below. Can you see her? Her raped, beaten, broken body, soaked in their urine, soaked in their semen, soaked in her blood, left to die. Can you see her? I want you to picture that little girl. Now imagine she's white.
Now imagine she's white.
The defense restroom.
Context of white supremacy. Justice Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date would be Friday, June 22nd, 2012, so I have been told. We will be back tomorrow. That would be Saturday, June 23rd, the compensatory call-in. I do have something I would like to talk about for the broadcast tomorrow. We'll set that up later perhaps, but program will be at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, Saturday afternoon. Definitely call in. I know we had some folks who were in the blessed chat room earlier this week who were talking about some of the difficulties with interacting with confused victims, particularly attempting to have some sort of care mate, sexual partner, where the partner is a little bit confused or a lot confused about racism, white supremacy. It's definitely something we can deal with on the program tomorrow. Dial in. Hopefully we can hear from a lot of non-white people. Constructive dialogue. As always, invest if you think the program is constructive. Always appreciate the support. Helps us to stay on the air. Big thanks to everyone who has invested and shared the program with other non-white people. Listener supported. Wouldn't be here without you all. Alrighty. Urugu study session. Supposed to be book club format. Not supposed to be Gus just, reading pages, giving his thoughts on what Dr. Marimba Ani had to say. Hopefully we'll have folks dial in. We are getting very close to the finish line. I think it should only be 2 more study sessions and we should be done. We'll have, I think, I'm looking at it now, I'm doing the page count. Yeah, regardless, even if we have to read a little more than 70, it should be 2 because I think for next Friday we should be doing 420 to 490. Right, I keep staying at 70 pages a week, and then I think for the last little bit, I think it goes to 570. So we might have to do 80 pages for the final study session. But I'm more than willing to do 80 pages for the final session, as opposed to doing 70 and then having to come back just to do 10 pages. So Should be 2 more study sessions and we will be all good. Hopefully it will benefit, and then you can, maybe I can even do a blog post and put all of the links to these study sessions together, so that if you have not been able to keep up with the reading, or you're just now finding out about the cows and you're coming in towards the tail end of our Yurugu sessions, they'll be all together so that you can see. I'm not even sure how many of these we've done. I think it's going to be close to 8 or 10 by the time that we're all done. So you'll be able to see them and you can read at your own clip, and then you'll have the study sessions as a reference guide. As I said, hopefully I'll be working on getting Dr. Ani on the program. So hopefully you'll have a lot of references to kind of help you through. I'm sure a lot of people out there, I know a lot of people out there have said that they have found this book to be challenging. So hopefully that'll be a contribution to making it easier, and you'll have some kind of cliff notes together that'll help you get the most out of Yurugu. Outstanding material. I think if you're able to comprehend what she's saying, man, I really think it will help you to kind of change the way that you think about white people and motivate you to want to do more to replace the system of racism, white supremacy with justice. At least that is my hope, and I'm very confident in the book. If you have the time, ability to get into it, it will definitely not be a waste. Alrighty, I will explain the sound clips before we hop into the material. I try to offer some different multimedia aids to keep people stimulated, interested in the program, and just to kind of reinforce whatever it is that we're talking about. I was missing one clip. I put it in the chat room. People should check out if you did the reading for this week, 350. If you did the reading for this week, if you paid close attention, Dr. Ani, she recommended the film The Rosary Murders. Came out in 1987. She didn't really even go into detail about the film, and I just said, if I'm going to be thorough, I'll see if I can watch it before the program on Friday. And I was able to find it online, check it out. I think our guest, understandingisness.wordpress.com, she put it in the chat room. The link, you can check it out online, reveals a lot, and it goes right in line with what Dr. Ani's been talking about the whole book, and this week specifically. I wasn't able to get the clip in, so I won't even say anything about it since I wasn't able to include it, although, man, it should have been there. The clips that you did hear, we started off with Pulp Fiction. You can check out my film review. It's on my blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. The film review I did for Pulp Fiction, and there should be a coming video and review of Quentin Tarantino's work, all of his films. This is leading up to Django Unchained, coming out on December 25th of this year. Not the first film that Quentin Tarantino has released on December 25th. At any rate, that first clip that you heard, white veteran giving over this watch to a young white child, and he gives the whole, anecdote about them being trapped in a POW camp, and you hear the language that he uses to describe these non-white people, so-called Asians, their gooks and slopes, and I wasn't going to let them get their greasy yellow hands on your birthright, this watch. Right in line all the way, the watch, the symbol for white people. About that efficiency and being meticulous about your time and watching what it is that you're doing, the value of this watch, just so much of that little clip from Pulp Fiction. It says so much. This watch, in my opinion, it has value because it has been hidden in the anus of another man for this long period of time. Oh, it says I'm echoing. Hang on, let's see. Okay, am I still echoing? Folks in the chat room, you can let me know if you're still hearing an echo. Still hearing an echo? Still hearing an echo? Still hearing it. Okay. Let's see. Let's try it one more time. Okay, now we're having a discrepancy. Some people are saying they don't hear the echo. I will take a live listen in myself and see if I hear an echo. Check, check. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Okay, I'm not hearing an echo. Let's see. Don't hear it. Oh, okay, looks like it might just be one person. Okay, sorry, guest 5. It's I'm not hearing it, and the other folks in the chat room are saying that they don't hear it either. So, not sure. Maybe reload. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate it. I'll keep an eye out to see if it checks. Maybe reload your page, guest 5, and other folks can let me know as well if they're hearing any feedback. You can put a hand up if you're listening via phone. If you hear any sort of audio distortion, you can just put a hand up and let me know that the audio is not coming through clearly. Anywho, so Pulp Fiction, in my view, that little clip reveals so much about white people, and I think the affinity of that film. I think a lot of the films that white people love and become huge financial successes and classics, they are simply revealing the white Asili. They are simply reinforcing, re-imaging what white people think about themselves and how white people are supposed to function on a planet dominated by racism, white supremacy. And I would absolutely say that Pulp Fiction serves that purpose. And I would say every single film that Quentin Tarantino has ever been involved with, reinforces that. I didn't know this until I started studying to do this project. Quentin Tarantino also wrote the story for Natural Born Killers. He didn't direct it. He didn't do the screenplay. I don't think he was involved in any other way, but he did write the story, Natural Born Killers, which is for sure white people. Anywho, so I think in that clip, it gets to Dr. Ani. We're going to talk about it. The anal nature of racist man, racist woman, racist child, the white culture. This watch, it has value. It becomes a huge part of the film where Bruce Willis is willing to risk his life to get this watch because it is so valuable. And he even says, do you know what my dad had to go through to get me that watch? He had to store it in his anus for, years for me to get that watch. And then another white man had to keep it in his behind for a year for me to get that watch. That even adds to the value of this timepiece. Real important theme. The next clip was from the film A Time to Kill, also a book. You can check out very popular Samuel L. Jackson in that film, as well as Pulp Fiction, the connections. At any rate, that segment, I think, really gives a great illustration of the first chapter that we're going to talk about, chapter 7, where Dr. Ani is breaking down the intracultural behavior. That is how white people are supposed to behave and treat other white people. There's supposed to be a different standard of conduct with regards to how white people are treated and how non-white people are treated. In Dr. Ani's work, she uses the term others, non-Europeans. Brilliant illustration. And I think they make that explicit throughout the film, where Samuel L. Jackson, his character says, the whole reason that I got you, my white attorney, is because I need you to make these white people understand why I did this, why I killed these trifling, racist, rapist, thug white people. And the only thing the white person can do is to get these white people to think of this raped child, the victim, to get them to think about her as a white person. That's the only defense he can come up with to save this black male's life, who is on trial for his life. The only defense if I can only get them to think of this child as a white person, then they will see the incorrectness of this. If I'm not able to get them to view the victim as another white person, this is something that would be totally unacceptable if committed against another white person. If I can get them to think about it in that way, they'll let this black male live. And that's what happens. Brilliant illustration. Right on target, I think. And finally, every second of the audio, in line with what we're supposed to be talking about today, in line with the whole program and the specific chapters that we're going to talk about, chapter 7, chapter 8. That theme music is from The Incredible Hulk, which is a extraordinary illustration. I'm not encouraging anybody to watch films. at least for myself, I have found it's very dangerous when you, I'm going to do an audio check just to make sure the audio is clear. Is the audio okay? I'm just checking with the caller in Brooklyn. I saw you had a hand up. Is the audio okay, or are there audio problems, concerns?
Oh, yeah, no, it's fine. I was going to say it was fine.
Oh, beautiful.
I can't hear anything.
Outstanding. Thank you kindly, sir. I will get you. Give me 1 second, and I will get, if anyone has feedback or what have you, I'll get all that. So the theme, right, for Incredible Hulk, and it's the end theme, the song that plays at the end of the television program that came on back, I don't know, long time ago. It's in syndication. You can see it online. They got it on Hulu if you want to check it out. Again, I'm cautious about recommending television programs because I found that if you recommend a series and you tell people you can analyze and study the racism in it, if it's a TV series, they tend to have a lot of them. You could end up, sucking up a lot of your time and energy trying to watch all the television episodes. So not that I'm encouraging that, but I think Incredible Hulk, there's a reason that Avengers just tore the box office to pieces and made all that money. The same thing that I said about Pulp Fiction. All of these films that become huge financial successes and win all the Oscars and accolades from white people, they reinforce the white supremacist asili. They reaffirm the way that white people want to see themselves as dominating and terrorizing non-white people, the masters of the universe, which is a television program, movie also. At any rate, with Incredible Hulk, just with the mythoform of the comic book, the TV program, the movies, I mean, this is a long-running bit of racist culture. You got the white scientist, which Dr. Ani has talked about over and over and over, and you even got a strong Yurugu element because the whole drive that kind of pushes the main white man over the edge, the white woman dies. So you got the absence of the female energy, right? Same thing she talked, that is Yurugu, the imbalance, no female energy, that conflict between male, female for white people. So the female dies in a car crash. The white man doesn't kill her, but she dies nonetheless, dies, and the white man is unable to save her. So he goes to the lab. Anger with creation, inability to accept death as a natural part of the human experience, right? Goes into the lab. I'll concoct something to make me super strong so that I will never be in that situation of being weak and unable to save the white woman again. And ends up radiating himself, contaminating himself, and becoming this monster. And the catcher, we talked about this with Kari Inaharo, who hosts the compensatory concept program with Mr. Fuller on Talktainment. He's been a guest on the program and the Talktainment series. You can check that out to hear Mr. Fuller on Wednesdays. But we talked about that in the book that he wrote about racism, white supremacy. White people are supposed to be rational, smart, scientific, efficient, objective, right? Everything Dr. Ani has laid out. Non-white people are supposed to be savage, emotional, unbridled, uncontained, wild. Everything Dr. Ani talks about is right there in Incredible Hulk. Any way you want to watch it, the TV program, the cartoon, the comic book, all of it. It's right there. Where he gets strong, he loses control of his emotion and wigs out. He bursts out of his clothes. He's naked. He no longer has a shirt. It's every single thing Dr. Ani talks about. The imaging of non-white people, the others, is right there in that series. Why did I end with the end theme for Incredible Hulk? Exactly what she's going to be talking about when we get to the reading. The title of that theme is The Lonely Man. And that is exactly what Dr. Ani says about white people. Disconnected from everyone else. They're only about domination, terrorizing, controlling non-white people and really everything. Nature, non-white people controlling and dominating everything. So they're not able to have loving, healthful relationships with other people, the creator, nature, none of that. And that's how every episode of Incredible Hulk ends, with this white man walking by himself off into the sunset. That's how they all end, with that music playing, The Lonely Man. And that's why we concluded with that. That is what white people are all about. Totally breaking bonds between the creator, other people, even yourself. And it plays out every week on Incredible Hulk if you want to check it out. Or The Avengers. I haven't seen The Avengers, but I'm pretty sure if it sticks to the mytho form of what that series is about, it's going to be in The Avengers too. I haven't seen it, but another story. Anywho, now we will get to the reading. We were doing for this week 350 to 420, which is pretty much all of chapter 7, which was pretty long. I think it was one of the longer chapters in the book. Chapter 7 and then a little bit of chapter 8, not too much. We'll do more on chapter 8 next week. To start off with, I'm actually going to rewind a little bit to last week because I think we did read the first couple pages of chapter 7, which again, the title, Intracultural Behavior, White People and the Codes, Rules that are supposed to govern how white people conduct themselves with other white people. This was from last week. I didn't read this segment last week, so I'm going to read it now since we're going to be talking about this chapter for pretty much the whole program. This is on page 342 over to 343. Not in this week's reading, but should have read it by now if you've been keeping up. Bottom of 342. In an effort to get at the idea of freedom, which is peculiar to American society, Dorothy Lee observed the areas in which Americans still expressed a sense of freedom in their linguistic usage. She found that free usually indicated a lack of constraint or obligation, i.e., freedom from entanglement, in regard to interpersonal relationships. She found that, oddly enough, the idea of freedom, as in free objects, tickets, for instance, meant that they were desirable but had no value. One saves money when something is free in this sense, but because it does not cost money, it is therefore not itself valuable. Then there's the idea of freedom as in free time, where free means uncommitted. Again, Lee found that such free time was not itself valuable. That is, it became so only when it was wrong to have too much free time. One has to go on and give an explanation or justification for such freedom, so as to endow it with a validity which is certainly not self-evident. The person who has nothing that he has to do is suspect and lacks value. Conversely, I hear people speaking proudly of all they have to do, whether they are referring to committed time or to what they do during their free time. The Protestant ethic, of course, regulates European behavior in this way so that work is active and positive, and to be free from work is to be somehow immoral. Lee concludes that free, as in free time, is therefore a negative condition. Free refers to emptiness and must be filled. This is a quote. Our free time is leisure time, potentially passive and empty, and subject to boredom unless we plan it carefully and fill it with activities. In fact, we have now a number of professions whose function is to provide means and aid to people for the filling of empty time, and an increasing leisure is viewed with apprehension by many of our leaders. This was another one of those paragraphs where I had a great deja vu moment. I remember the first time I was reading this book, and I was just struck by that passage. I had begun when I was taking my time, really repossessing my time and my mind to be on the journey to end up doing the cows, about just how strong that drive is in the world that is dominated by a racist man, racist woman, racist child. You are supposed to be doing something in support of white supremacy. You're not supposed to just be sitting around with the opportunity to think about what's happening, what you want to do with your life, what you want to do with your time, things that are happening. You're not supposed to just be sitting around where you might have the opportunity to connect with the Creator. You might get messages sent to you. Anything could happen. You really might get an opportunity to come in touch with other people, yourself, and really get a different perspective on life. That's not supposed to happen. You're supposed to be doing things, actively engaged, doing this, doing that, working, and I just, first time I read this book, it was really standing out to me. It's almost as though, as she says, there's something deviant about having time that has not occupied, where you're not doing anything, you're not on your job, or you're not having tasks and things that you're supposed to be doing. It's almost as though there is something sinful about just having time that is not designated for anything. I'm just here. We'll see what happens. That is, and for me, I think that is fantastic. I don't think I would have got to the point of becoming less confused about racism if I did not repossess my time. And when I talk about time, value your time, what you're doing, and just being observant about what it is and how you invest your time. If you just want to take some time out the next week, I'm not going to schedule anything. I'm just going to relax and see what happens, give myself an opportunity and the space to think about things. That is phenomenal. Also about, can we focus on what's been, I don't know if they're talking to me specifically. I feel like I'm on task. They must be talking to people in the chat. I'll assume they're talking about people in the chat room being off topic. I say that all the time. I've griped about that consistently. People in the chat room not being on topic, just, talking about, the other people. That's why, I've been a big opponent of the chat room. It just invites a lot of foolishness where people come in and are talking crazy. Anywho, be mindful of your time. Mindful of your time. I was going to see if I was going to read any more of this. Oh, yeah, it does have some more good stuff. Yeah, I'll read the rest of it. She goes on. This is continuing with time. I was on task. So what becomes even clearer as a result of this discussion is that it is not simply the idea of freedom per se that is valued in contemporary European society, but a very specific kind of freedom associated almost totally with the unique European concept of validity and necessity of the autonomous individual. Freedom as an attribute of space or time has no worth so long as it remains in that state. Space is empty and to be occupied with matter. Time is empty and to be filled with activity. Whereas often in other cultures, free space and time have being and integrity. In evidence of this, Lee goes on to cite examples from other cultures in which the experience of silence, of the space between and within, is meaningful. She speaks of such Japanese perceptions that persists in spite of the adoption of Western culture and science. In the non-European cultures, Lee continues, free time through being recognized as valid existence can and does contain value, whereas in our own culture it is perceived as the unallocated and the unscheduled, the nothing, and it cannot contain value as it contains no being. In addition to the fact that they contain no value, empty spaces are indeed uncomfortable to the European, and he experiences silence as either embarrassing or frightening. That also reminds me of Pulp Fiction. Not that I needed another sound clip from Tarantino, but the segment early on where John Travolta and Uma Thurman, where they're talking, and she comments about how it is so rare and difficult for white people to have moments of silence where you can be with another person and you don't feel compelled to run off at the mouth and just say anything just to fill that space. How it's just impossible to sit quietly in silence. It's not a problem. There's no issue. We're just quietly enjoying the moment. Very difficult for white people. And in fact, because I always love a time where I can work Jill Scott into something, a black male that I know who's big into music and studying it, he commented about Jill Scott and some of her music where there is empty space. No singing, no talking, just empty space. And he had a great appreciation for that, where it's a form of patience. In fact, he also referenced Miles Davis and saying that he also talked about the importance of having space where you are doing music, but you don't feel compelled to necessarily fill that space with talking or singing or what have you, the importance of silence and how that can be used. I would even say people who listen to the context of white supremacy have commented about silence and sometimes just having space where there is no talking. And I would definitely say, if you're talking about racism, silence, man, I love it because, one, you give an opportunity to slow the conversation down. People can think about what's being said. Does it make sense? If it does, is this something that I should be applying to my own thought, speech, and action? Very important segment. I think white people do a lot to disrupt that space, that silence, the quiet, just filling things. And really, I think a part of it is to disrupt your rhythm. You don't have as much time to think and reflect on things when you're constantly bombarded with sound, noise, obligations, just things that are eating up your time and space. It really clutters your life and your way of thinking, your ability to relate to what's going on with other people, yourself, nature, the creator, whole nine. Very important segment. Alrighty, moving forward. And someone mentioned Dogville, Understanding Isness. If you want to share on that, I can ring you if you want to share on how that related to the film Dogville, which I think is phenomenal. That is part one in a series of films. If you really want to get the double whammy, you'd have to watch part two of that film, which is Manderley. Whoa, can't go into detail about that right now, but awesome, awesome film all about racism, white supremacy. And there is a racist code book in Manderley. I've talked about it many times. You should check it out. It's available online. All right, moving forward. Moving to page 351, same chapter, 351. We're current now on what we're supposed to be reading this week, but same chapter. All of this around how white people are supposed to function with other white people. 351, second paragraph. European culture creates a being who thrives on competition and therefore on individual and distinct achievement. Because there is not a natural regard for personal worth born from and supported by the culture. Because a person's existence as a member of the group does not in itself mean much. The individual strives to be better than, to stand apart from others in his craving for recognition. This serves to reinforce his separate awareness and to further decrease his ability to identify with others. He, least of all, can define his good or his goals in terms of universal harmony. It should be even clearer now that there is no supportive mechanism or precedent for altruistic ethic or spirit of universal brotherhood. The only thing that binds members of the culture together in the final analysis, that binds them into a unified cultural whole, is the common goal of the suppression, exploitation, and control of the rest of the world, the environment, the earth, and its people. That which is other than the culture itself. It is a union of like-minded people who have cooperated in the creation of a technological giant or monster. Page 351. Whew. Absolutely. Could not be better stated. I don't think that is the only thing that white people have binding them together as a global terrorist organization. Traumatization, abuse, domination of non-white people, nature, the planet, everything. That is the only thing binding them together. And for me, because I believe that is a true statement, Mr. Fuller has said the same thing, because I believe that is a true statement and an extremely important statement with regards to understanding white people, that is why I do not think that they will kill all black people. They require black, and I think she pretty much is saying that in this book, they require having non-white people around to be the focus of their destructive, violent, aggressive nature. If they did not have, she says this repeatedly, if there were no non-white people, white people would self-destruct. the violence, the aggression that is core to their nature, it would have to be directed towards something, someone, and if they did not have black and non-white people on this planet, they would have to designate some white people as non-white. They would have to find an outlet for that aggression. Have to. That's one of the reasons why I think they have not killed non-white people. And again, as Mr. Fuller has said repeatedly, if they wanted to do away with us all, they could have done so a long time ago. They enjoy having us around. They enjoy the photograph that I put on my Facebook page. They enjoy this. They are having fun with all of this. The Trayvon Martin assassination, murder. You got white people, groups of white people, not just one. It's not just anomalous behavior. You got groups of young white people going out and taking photographs, having fun, pretending to be Trayvon Martin, laying on the ground with a bag of Skittles in one hand and an Arizona tea in the other hand, and getting people to take a picture of them as though they've been shot and killed in the manner of Trayvon Martin. They enjoy it. It is fun for them. They have a grand old time being terroristic against non-white people in mass. Moving forward, I'll again give out the number if folks are interested in sharing, dialing in to give their commentary. The number to dial, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Folks have thoughts, comments that they want to add. If you dial that line, press *6, and if you're on the free HD line, press *8 from the free HD line. Alrighty, moving forward. All right, page. I had another deja vu moment as I was reading. I'm on page 355, same chapter, 355, chapter 7. I'm on, I guess the 1, 2, 3. I guess this is like the third paragraph down, 355. It is interesting here to take note of the two connotations of the European term jungle, related only via the logic of European chauvinism, white supremacy. One of these is that of an area of land dense and thick with vegetation which has not been inhabited or cultivated. The other is that of a grouping of detached individuals, each one willing to commit any amount of violence to another to ensure his own survival. This image carries with it that of pervasive fear that comes with the complete loss of communal and therefore moral order. When one is continually aware of the possibility of being attacked from anywhere at any time. This image is that of the Euro-American city, the true jungle. In this second connotation are the New Yorkers, the concrete structures that are truly opposites of the first definition of jungle. That is where this extreme deterioration prevails, as opposed to those areas least touched by European culture. Europeans have finally made their own conceptual invention, the complete lack of moral order, a reality. And this is the final outcome of the ideology of individualism. Another deja vu moment that I had in reading the book. I remember the first time that I read that section, and it was just, wow. Really stood. I mean, when they say some truths are self-evident, absolutely. Man, if you want to talk about a dangerous environment to be in, any of these so-called cities that white people have established anywhere in the world, and particularly as a black person, but I mean, even beyond that, and she talks about this as well, even beyond that, you can be a white person anywhere in the world, in white cities, and it's not the safest place. They have tons of stories of the Central Park jogger, where they tried to blame that on black people. Even being a white person being out there, man, just the nature of white people, the violence, the aggression, the competition. You are not safe. Also, one other point I definitely wanted to make sure to emphasize when I was reading before about the competition that is a major part of what racist man, racist woman are all about. It's not even just, really the race, totally about dominating non-white people, black people especially. However, even with white people, they are competing amongst themselves to see who can out-violent the other white person, who can earn more, who can do more, who can build the largest structure, the largest skyscraper, who has the most slaves, who can have the largest plantation. White people do a lot of competing with themselves, right? And which evolves into them mistreating other white people to compete and say that I am the greatest racist. I am the greatest white supremacist. You have a lot of that amongst white people. You see white women, the competition amongst themselves when they go out, even amongst white women that are allegedly friends. I think anybody, if you've been on a job situation where you work around white people, I would say males or females, you'll see a lot of that where they are very aggressive and competitive even amongst themselves, much less other non-white people. Anywho, moving forward. Okay, I'm on 3. Let's see, 3. 364, and she in this segment of the chapter, as I said, this is one of the longer chapters that we've read in the book, chapter 7, 364, and she mentions a lot of Joel Koval. Again, he was on the program. You can go in the archives, check it out. I think he was October 2010. We discussed his work, his psychoanalysis of white people and the whys and wherefore with regards to their practice of racism, white supremacy. Suspected racist Joel Koval. 364. Actually, before I get to 364, a little bit I want to read. This is from 363. Top of 363, first paragraph. And she's in this section, she's talking about the way that the Protestant ethic, Protestant religion, how that factored in shaping the code of conduct with regards to how white people are supposed to treat other white people, and to kind of be a governor so that their terroristic, violent behavior doesn't leak over onto white people. Keep that confined to the way that we're going to be abusing black people. So this is 363, first paragraph, 363. Let's see. Okay, she says, this person was suited to the growth of capitalism and the development of modern Western society. He was an extreme individualist, which of course has precedence in the earliest traditions of the European Udumawazo, culturally structured thought. Only the emphasis was new. He was extremely self-reliant. He was the prototype of the good and successful businessman. Mumford says the Protestant personality was businesslike even when there was no business in hand. Calvin openly sanctioned the ethics of business, a sanction that was absolutely necessary. If a modern capitalistic state was to develop and prosper, a belief in the morality and sacredness of personal property and the fulfillment of contracts was essential. We are only now beginning to witness the implications for the capitalist system and the Western Empire when such an ethic is not accepted. Not in the advent of Russian socialism, but in the coming of the skyjacker and other forms of so-called terrorism. Terror to the West because the West loses control. This is the top of 363. And this kind of tying in a lot of the ideas together. Number one, about time, the importance of how this Protestant ethic organizing white people to constantly be doing things, particularly important, remembering what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing says all the time. We're talking about white people, a tiny minority of people. Dr. Arnie enforces that as well. A tiny minority. You don't have tons and tons of white people on the planet. When you, as a small group of people, the true minorities on the planet, are looking to dominate the other 90% of the population, people are going to have to be active. You can't have folks just sitting around. You can't have large numbers of white people who are just lazy and doing nothing and sitting around. You got to have a lot of people, a lot of white people who are actively invested in various aspects of maintaining the system of white supremacy, which is why I think that that whole Protestant ethic and the focus on time and efficiency is supposed to be doing something. I think that is why that means so much to white people, their worship of clocks, in a sense, Big Ben, and having clocks everywhere, almost having the clock be a very part of your being. I think that is why that is so important for white people, their minority status on the planet. Also in that section, on her talking about losing control when it becomes terrorism, when white people lose control of how the violence is administered and where the violence is directed. It becomes terrorism when that violence is not directed at Trayvon Martin or Ramarley Graham or Aiyana Jones or any number of non-white people throughout the world. It becomes terrorism when the victim becomes the white woman in Arizona when she gets shot. Now it becomes terrorism. When you have large numbers of white people, the Twin Towers, when they die and lose their lives, then it becomes terrorism. As long as it's directed at other non-white people, black people especially, no big deal. Not terrorism. Not a Holocaust. It's a Holocaust when you have individuals who are now classified as white, so-called Jews, when Hitler goes and decides he wants to stomp on them, murder large numbers of them, it is a Holocaust. When you have millions of black people enslaved and murdered throughout the slave trade, that is not a Holocaust. That is an unfortunate footnote in history. Those are the type of words that they'll use to describe it. Moving forward, and again, this is not, someone had said in the chat room that they would participate when we get to the question answer section. This is not typical, like when we have a guest on the program and we kind of wait till the last, 30 minutes or so, or the last hour to take questions. This is supposed to be kind of like a book club. So if people are listening in, if you've been reading along and you have questions, definitely chime in, let us know. If something that I've been reading doesn't make sense, definitely get a hand up and let us know. If you have been reading and you have your own sections of the book that you've been reading and it doesn't make sense, definitely chime in, let us know. As I said, this is supposed to be a book club. My motivation for doing this definitely drops when it's seeming like either people are not keeping up with the reading and or people don't want to talk for whatever reason, if they feel confused or intimidated, whatever the case may be, my motivation drops. The whole purpose behind this was people saying that they wanted to have a book session around this, and it's been my experience book sessions operate where you have lots of people, plural, actively participating and talking about different sections of the book and what they thought about it, or if they had questions, if something didn't make sense, definitely asking questions. I think we got other people who have been keeping up with the reading who can also offer their input if you are not clear about something that was in the book, whether I mentioned it or if you did some reading on your own. I'll give out the number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943 pound. Right on. Check. Call in Brooklyn. Did have a hand up. Call in Brooklyn. Do you have a question, comment?
Hey, Shooby-Doo guys and callers. Yeah, I was glad you brought up that thing, the little section from the last portion that we did last week. We didn't get to with the little comments about freedom and the marginalized kind of space that it's put in by the European or whatever, suspect the racist viewpoint. how they look at freedom as like something that needs to be filled up by them and their methods and stuff. That was I was probably going to bring that up, so I'm glad that you did. And then about just the whole concept of emptiness and stuff, like, you know, they're kind of acting like now, you know, there's making these books like the Tao of Physics. She mentioned that book by Friedrich Capra, who is a white suspected racist, and I guess calls himself a Buddhist, and he's a nuclear physicist, and he made a book about like the drawing comparisons to modern physics findings and the Buddhist concept of the nature of reality, and just the importance of emptiness and space. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And I guess you're going into like the where she's talking about the Protestant stuff. I'm not really that religious, so that stuff is new to me, and it was interesting to read. To put that into the context of the progression that she's charting from a Platonic, the kind of like you know, sterilized reality of Platonic, like of Greece. They kind of got it wrong. They kind of like got this really sterilized kind of, you know, usurped the African knowledge and then kind of like got some things wrong, but then they just kind of rallied behind that, and then kind of it evolved into the to where they needed some structure to their imperialism, that internal structure, which I guess kind of emerged in that Protestant ethic. I guess like kind of the early modern, so-called modern, you know, view of man and American and values and all that white picket fence stuff, and just you know, killing people in the boardroom, you know, take no prisoners type of business ethic. Yeah, I'm at work right now, but when my hands aren't so busy, I'll chime in and stuff. Right on.
Good looking. I reckon you want to mute your line, and then you can feel free to hop in once you have a free moment where you can kind of participate without getting into any trouble from the white folks. Okie doke. Yes, she does go into quite a bit of detail with regards to the Protestant work ethic and how that contributed to the molding of how white people are supposed to be conducting themselves, particularly amongst other white people. And this section kind of touches on that a bit more. This is on 364, middle of 364, I think, second paragraph. The Protestant statement, on the other hand, directed inwardly towards its own people, sought precisely to build such an individual. Asceticism and sterility, the negation of the humanness and warmth of other cultures, were interpreted as positive characteristics. Therefore, whereas Catholicism found a valuable tool in the maintenance and incorporation of majority culture forms, Protestantism diligently rid itself of all sensuality, emotional and artistic vitality, and expansive ritual. Protestantism flatly rejected everything it considered non-European, and in the process helped greatly to harden in European culture the sterile and the abstract, the non-human tendencies already recognizable in its development, dictated by the Asili, Mumford says. And she does a great, in my view, she does a great comparison with regards to independent. Matter of fact, I'll read the previous paragraph, give a little more context to that section where she's comparing Protestantism, the Protestant religion, quote unquote, and how that was used and directed inwardly towards white people with regards to Catholicism, and how that was directed outwardly towards non-white people with the goal of imperialism. I'll read that so it'll be a little clearer. This is the top of 364. Catholicism has been historically successful in its vigorous missionizing efforts among majority non-white peoples, while Protestant missions have never been comparable in this endeavor. The later success of the non-Catholic Church among First World peoples, African, Aladura, Puerto Rican Pentecostal, African Caribbean Shango Baptist, African American Baptist Church, is ironically bought at the price of total denial of Reformation Protestantism. Again, the purposes and objectives of these two religious statements were different. Catholicism, representing the early Christian church in its imperialistic role, would never have been successful in gaining first world converts if it had approached them with the harshness of the Puritan ethic. And, what is more important, such an approach would have defeated the purpose of European imperialism. It would have been the attempt to promote an ideology of self-sufficiency, independence, and defensive strength among African peoples, much as the Nation of Islam does. So you get that contrast with regards to what the religion is supposed to be doing. With non-white people, we do not want to instill them with any ideas of self-sufficiency, self-determination. We don't want any of that. We want them thinking dependently. We want them to be obedient. We want them thinking that suffering is good. You're suffering for the will of God. You're suffering and showing your faith and your belief in the great white Jesus. That will make them more obedient. That will make them more likely to accept the abuse and terrorism that we're going to be dumping on them in heaps. They won't think that they should be revolting or doing anything about this. They'll be thinking, we should pray. We should pray and endure it, and we'll just get through it, and we'll get ours. We'll get our just rewards once we pass on. That's the way that we'll be thinking. The Protestant faith, Protestantism, very different. Directed not for the non-white people, but for white people and how they should be thinking, which is totally different. Self-sufficient, self-reliant. You shouldn't be looking to depend on other people for anything. You should be looking towards yourself. And I think she even talks, not in this particular passage, but later on, how this, with regards to white people, it increased literacy rates. Shouldn't be dependent even upon another white person to have to read and interpret the Bible for you. You should be doing this yourself, and that is a key difference. What they did not do when they promoted so-called Christianity on black people in this area of the world, the United States, it was not about be self-sufficient, get your own Bible, interpret it. They did the exact opposite. We do not want you with a Bible ever, even though we're cool with you being devoted to white Jesus. We do not want you reading and thinking, interpreting for yourself. We'll do all that for you. Matter of fact, we will allow you to have your own little churches for your religious meetings on the plantation, but we will closely govern what you talk about in these meetings, which passages from the Bible you use and give sermons on. Very different objectives, very different purposes, and the audience is going to be very different for where these two different religious practices are going to be directed. Let's see. We do have a hand up. Person who called in, last four digits 5301. 5301. Your line should be open.
Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay. I'm not at home yet with my book, but something that you just said resonated with me. Particularly, I'm on my way, so I should have my book in a few minutes. But particularly, when you think back to historically the church as it's been in America and the incidences of Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, and Gabriel Prosser. each of those instances occurred as a result of these three individuals who were steeped in Christian theology, taking away from that doctrine a perspective for self-sufficiency and liberation. And with Nat Turner being the only one who succeeded in an act of actual retaliation for black people being subjugated during slavery, which is one of the reasons why whenever they speak of Nat Turner, they never mention the aspect that in his mind, based on the fact that he considered himself being led by the scriptures or the doctrine, what he grew up with, he felt that this was a righteous act, this was an ordained act. From his perspective of looking at scripture, he felt that it was divinely orchestrated, more specifically, according to the narrative of his life. He even prayed, fasted, left the plantation, ran away scot-free, and felt that the God of his understanding told him that he was supposed to go back and remain in bondage until he was given a sign to do what he was called to do. So he went back and faced even greater being tormented by other blacks who said to him, "You were home free. You escaped. You could have gotten away from the plantation. Why would you have come back?" And he was such a disciplined individual and so well versed in their scriptures, they called him a cotton patch preacher, that he had such a huge following of folks who came to listen to him. And he was so disciplined that when it came time for him to do what he put in his mind that he was going to do, there was just no way that they could have prevented that sort of thing from occurring. And then when you look at the example of Denmark Vesey, with Denmark Vesey, he also used the church as a gathering place for him to be able to conduct his meetings, for him to be able to rally the individuals to his cause for liberation. The downfall of Gabriel Prosser was that I think they drank the Kool-Aid in the sense that they actually believed or perceived the scriptures as being something that told them that they couldn't get out of slavery, which is why Gabriel Prosser, one of his chief objectives is that he ultimately wanted to sit down with his oppressors at a dinner, stately dinner, and, negotiate the way that life would be from that point moving forward, which we know in hindsight was absolutely ridiculous. So that's just what I wanted to add, because that's what stood out to me as I was reading the passage. And since I've studied the lives of those three individuals extensively and studied quite a bit about church history, and more specifically the so-called black church, I noticed this immediately, because one of the things that the missionaries would do is whenever they would encounter any other culture, they would never tell them any of the passages of the scriptures in which the so-called Hebrew Israelites took up arms to overthrow their oppressor. They would always indoctrinate them with scriptures about being passive, about waiting for Christ, about sacrifice and salvation. And for those who classify themselves as Bible believers, they could just look at the example of those three individuals I cited. They made the ultimate sacrifice. They gave their lives for the liberation of their people. So why isn't it that they haven't become deified like folks deify a lot of these individuals in Scripture? Why is it that folks don't talk about how Nat Turner, was hung high? Why is it that folks don't talk about the bravery of Denmark Vesey, who said to his cohort, "Die like a man and don't snitch"? Why is it that people don't celebrate the lives of those three individuals? And I think it's because they've just been brainwashed with doctrine the way that the missionaries have done to, like, the Panati Indians. When they encountered the Panati Indians, in order for the missionaries to overcome them, they learned their language and they rewrote the New Testament and took out certain parts of the New Testament and wrote it in a way in which it said the Fanati Indians killed Jesus. So you've got to surrender your life or the big, great fire is going to consume you. And the Fanati Indians were terrified. And they said, oh, please don't let us be terrified by the great big fire. And they gave their lives over to the missionaries, and the rest is history. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Wow. Good to hear from S-Dot. I think those are excellent points around black people, Denmark, VC, Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, black people who did not follow the scripted religion the way that white people wanted them to follow it, but who took it and altered it to meet their counter-racist objectives. And I think quite a few black people have done that, who have altered it and not just followed the script that racist man, racist woman have given us to follow. And I think white people have done a very good job of skillfully misrepresenting these people as being religious people, who were all saying, hey, I am in touch with the Creator. The Creator is moving me to combat these white terrorists. The Creator is inspiring me to do all that I can to work against racist man, racist woman, racist child. And even when I was hearing that, because I think we had the program about Nat Turner with the black female, she just wrote the book about him the end of last year. I'm a Victim. Her name is escaping me. I'll get it in a moment. But she was on the program. She emphasized that as well, how that is something that white people kind of conveniently skip over, that he was a minister. Nat Turner talking about. And I know with Grand Wizard Goss in the UK, we got our listener in the UK, or one of our listeners in the UK, on with us right now. He was saying the same thing about Minister Malcolm, and he says that he makes a deliberate and conscious effort to reference him as Minister Malcolm anytime that he talks about El Haj Malik Shabazz. He doesn't just say Malcolm X or whatever. He says Minister Malcolm, so that people don't just think this was some rowdy, the way that white people were presented. Oh, this is just some racist black guy and he hated everyone. Minister Malcolm, this is someone who was inspired by the Creator with a message of self-sufficiency, self-determination, counter-racism for black people. Very different way of thinking. So yeah, I think those excellent points that you bring up. White people, they really do not want to see black people tying religion. We talked about, I think that was the first program we did this year with C.C. Blackman, about the importance of tying spirituality and religion to working against racism, white supremacy, because I think white people have done that. They have incorporated a spiritual aspect. They have made racism, white supremacy their religion, the religion of terrorism against black people. That's what they've made their spiritual practice. And I think black people, for us to be effective, we need to do the same. Those illustrations, in my view, folks who did a phenomenal job under some very poor conditions of getting that done. Yeah, I guess leave your line if you want to chime in, if you get home and you get access to your book. Any of the other folks, if y'all want to chime in, feel free as well.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to add, because you mentioned this about the religion of white supremacy. I just wanted to call to people's attention that as a result of one of the individuals who betrayed the plot of Denmark Vesey, what he was rewarded was his so-called freedom, and he was granted ownership, if you will, of a number of slaves. And this was particularly done on Christmas Day. And another freedom fighter, Harry, name escapes me right now, the last name, and he was actually down in Florida. He and his wife were members of the NAACP, and they were involved in registering people for voting and so forth. And the Ku Klux Klan blew up their house and killed them in their house on Christmas Day. So I just want folks to recognize the significance in which these individuals practice their so-called religion, and that some folks are so caught up in focusing on Christmas or all these other days and considering them high holy days. But for those who benefit from this particular perspective, their religion every day, all day, is domination and subjugation, and this is how they celebrate it. And let's just never lose sight of the fact that one of the symbols which they consider to be sacred is the very same symbol that they will burn on your lawn, or they will hang you from. So I just think that it's really terrible that a lot of black folks, a lot of confused black folks, are so caught up in the symbolism of religion, and more specifically this particular theology, and not really looking at it historically. Because when I brought up the individual who I was talking about, who was killed with his wife on Christmas Day, I called into a program of a reverend, a Christian minister, who was talking about Christmas and the history of Christmas, and that was the name of the program. So on that program, he was pointing out all of these significant things that have happened or occurred to make the so-called holiday called Christmas possible. He was talking about how this person wrote this song, how this person did this, how that person did that. And I said to him, and I pointed out how this individual and his wife, who classified themselves as Christians, who were fighting for the liberation of black people, had their house bombed on Christmas Day and were killed as a result of it. The individual's name is Harry Moore. It just came to me. And I said, so you're pointing out all the things that happened on Christmas or related to Christmas, but why is it that you aren't pointing this out, and you are a black minister, a black pastor? Why is it that you're not bringing this aspect out? And he just totally jumped right over it and said, well, this is the day that we celebrate the Lord Jesus Christ. And then I brought up to him, well, it has been proven by theology itself that if Jesus was a historical figure, that he would not have been born on Christmas Day. So therefore, you're exalting this day as a high holy day, and it's been proven that this is not even a birth date of who you claim to be historical Jesus, and he got really irate at that too. So, just something for folks to think about. But I'll mute my line. I'm almost home, and I'll have my book in a few minutes.
Oh, right on. Okay. Wow, what I said a little bit before about that white chip. As Dr. Kanban says, you have that little white traffic cop in your head, and anything that gives a contrast to that, anything that opposes what white people, the way they have conditioned and brain trashed us to think about the world, the creator, white people, ourselves, anything that goes counter to that, it's like that little traffic cop, the white traffic cop in your head, just, hey, wait a minute now. Not supposed to be talking that. Make sure you put that Negro in check. He's not supposed to be saying that about white people or white Jesus or any of our white Christian religious practices. He's not supposed to be saying that. Make sure you put him in check. That white chip, very active. I think, even as I've said repeatedly, I think anyone, if they're having difficulties in reading Yurugu or any other books on racism, white supremacy, it could be that white chip, things that tend to go against your programming that supports white supremacy. You have a difficult time processing. You can get angry, emotional, denial, can go a lot of different ways, but that is standard procedure, unfortunately. I'll leave your line open if you have other things you want to comment. I'll give out the number before I read a little bit more, and I'll keep looking, but the number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you have questions, if you're on that line. If any of the folks who dialed in on the TalkShoe line, if you all have questions, it's star 8 if you're on the TalkShoe line. Right on. This, I'll read a little bit, see if we get any more folks who dial in. I'm on 370. 370, she again is referencing Joel Covell, guest on the Cows. 370, and this goes back to our sound clip from Pulp Fiction. keeping the watch in the anus of another white man, and that adds to the value, the sacredness, if you will, of this watch, where she's talking about the anality of white culture. 370. Excuse me, I got something in my eye. Give me 1 second. All right. 370. Clearly, this describes a non-spiritual ethic or morality, a phenomenon that is totally European and one that should be understood as such. Modern bourgeois man, says Covell, who began his development propped up by the Protestant faith, succeeds in pushing God aside even as he worships him. The implications of anality in the psychoanalytic description of personality structure are diametrically opposed to what I mean by spirituality. It is the result of the denial of the human spirit. Covell identifies the Protestant ethic and its development with the anal personality. In his view, it was a natural outgrowth of the anal Western personality. This interpretation is the basis of his theory of European imperialism and white racism, white supremacy. He takes this explanation to its extreme in his characterization of Luther. Norman Brown has made the same point. She's quoting Joel Covell right here. His personality was to a considerable extent elaborated upon anal fantasies. Two of his personality traits, stubbornness and defiance, were a decisive aid to him in his rebellion against papal authority. The turning point in modern Western history was when Luther's idea of the power of individual faith struck him in a flash of inspiration while he sat upon the privy, and that this genius was not loath to stress the importance of this in applying fecal symbolism to all evil parts of the universe, especially to the devil, God's black antagonist. End of Covell. This is back to Dr. Ani. Luther's personality is generalized and becomes that of the successful and unsuccessful but ardent supporter of the system, aggressive European. Similar character configurations have aided countless other Westerners in their stubborn and defiant efforts to impose a new world culture upon other civilizations. Below, Covell isolates the characteristics that describe the behavior of the European, sanctioned and directed by the Protestant ethic: control, stubbornness, defiance, orderliness, cleanliness, punctuality, and thrift. These complicated traits, which have characterized the West more than any other civilization, devolve into anal fantasies, and the resolution of their logical incompatibility is achieved through an unconscious symbolic root in infantile fantasies about excretion. End of Covell. This is back to Dr. Ani writing. Covell is not the only one who has hinted at a relationship between European anal development and European aggression. The film Cradle of Humanity, made by a team of European psychologists for UNESCO, documents a study that they conducted of the relationship between mothers and infants in West Africa. They concluded that the closeness of this relationship encourages precocious mental and physical development in very early childhood. In the course of the film, some comparisons are made with European child-rearing practices and attitudes. One point of comparison concerned toilet training, a very problematical transition in the development of the European, in which the child experiences rejection and separation from the parent and from the self. It results in a kind of traumatization in which fear and confusion becomes hostility and imposed order. Pleasure associated with control, ? The European child is made to sit alone on an alien, cold object and cannot rejoin the group, in a sense, until he is cleansed. Since the mother parent is not sure of the exact time of the need to excrete, This very young child often sits for long periods alone or with a book, or leaves only to be placed in isolation again, sometimes as a punishment. As the film reveals, Cradle of Humanity, the traditional African practice is startlingly different. The mother and child, who are almost literally never physically separated, develop a special way of communicating that has deep spiritual, even psychological significance. The child uses this special language to indicate to her mother when she wants to relieve herself. The mother then takes the child from her back, where she is carried, and sitting on the ground with her legs stretched out in front of her. She positions the child so that she, the child, is sitting on her mother's legs facing her mother. The mother's legs are spaced so that the child excretes on the ground. It is if for some reason the child does not relieve herself, the mother makes a shushing sound that somehow encourages the child to do so. The result of this is an extremely different kind of experience from that which children raised in European societies undergo. One is a natural process depending on spiritual connection between the closest of human beings. The other is a frighteningly artificial procedure that interjects sterile material objects into an organic process and succeeds in alienating human beings from one another as it imposes order on human life by denying human spirituality. I will stop there. She does go on a little bit, but I'll stop there. I think we might even have some other callers. Again, reminded of Pulp Fiction, the scene that you heard at the top of the program. I'm also reminded of the film The Help, Academy Award nominee. And I was reminded specifically where one of the duties of the Help, the black females, was the potty training. And the film, I think that's an integral part of the film, where the white parents are not involved in that process at all. It was the black female who is there and holding the child's hand and encouraging her and cheering her on and rooting her on to use the potty and hugging her while she's there. It's the black female who is doing the real parenting. It's the white woman. She is, not there at all. I'm even reminded of the scene when they play the joke. The racist white woman has the campaign about not allowing the black maids, the help, to use the same toilets as the white people. And the other suspected racist, the other racist in the film, the white woman who's organizing all these studies to be done, the story, so she can write this book, she plays the joke where she ends up writing this piece so that everyone brings their old toilets and puts them on the lawn of the overtly racist white woman, right? And so the little child who's been potty training, she goes and she sits on one of these toilets that's on the front yard, and she starts to go potty, and the white woman just goes berserk, and she picks the child up off the toilet and starts spanking her out in front of everybody. Totally traumatizing experience on the toilet. But yeah, just reminded me of that scene from The Help as well. I'll double check. Person that called in from Indiana, your line should be open as well. Caller in Indiana.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yes, hi. I wanted to ask you a question. Okay, it's a very personal question, but my daughter, she's always listening to your show all the time, your program, and basically we talk a lot, and I wanted to know, can black people be racist?
Okay. A little off topic, but absolutely not. Absolutely not. Make sure I get that clean, and then I will give a reasoned explanation, because I think that's helpful. I think this is one of those that every black person, we really need to be dedicated in making sure anytime we have dialogue with other black people, other non-white people, that they overstand. And I mean, they got it cold turkey. They can give an explanation. If you wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning on their worst day, they can give you a quick 5-minute explanation that will make perfect logical sense as to why it is impossible for a black person to be racist. Now, I'll use the example that Dr. Joy DeGruy gave. Now, if we were in a room, it was just us, but we could do this in a room with white people, black people, the whole nine. Oh, I can give two. And I asked, can you think, and I'll ask you, ma'am, can you think of any examples of ways that large numbers of white people are mistreated by black people in any area of activity? So what I mean, can you think of examples of white people not being able to go to school, college, not being able to get quality access, like they get the raggedy books or they get sent to special education class? If we're talking education, if we're talking entertainment, can you think of examples of where black people, they make films that are just constantly degrading white people or not giving them roles at all, so that you don't see white people on television at all? Black people just totally block them out of entertainment. Can you think examples of all areas of people, laws where black people make laws that are specifically designed and or the end result is that white people are harmed? Large numbers of white people are harmed. Either they're not able to get quality housing, they're not able to get loans. The laws are just structured in a way so that white people, large numbers of white people, will be harmed. Can you think of any examples of where black people are able to harm large numbers of white people?
No, not from the point you just made. No.
Okay. You want some more time to think about it to see if you can come up with any examples of where black...
Okay, so far where black people will be discriminated?
No, where white people will be harmed. White people will be harmed. Large numbers of white people harmed by black people.
No, I honestly I can't, because I've never came in encounter with black people, treating white people, that way.
Mm-hmm.
I came in contact with, vice versa, white people treating black people, that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, see, I have asked, and again, I got this from Dr. Joy DeGruy. She gave this illustration when she was on the program in May of 2010. She's been on the program a couple times. She's a black female. She authored Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, great book. She was at the White Privilege Conference. I saw her there too, and she's pretty attractive. Anywho, she says she's done this repeatedly, where white people and non-white people will come to her and say, well, I think black people are racist, or I think non-white people are racist, and she'll do that same example. And every time she says no one is able to come up with the first thing where white people are being harmed by black people, large numbers of white people. No one ever gets the first thing on the board. And I haven't had that happen either. We had a racist white guy on the program not too long back. I was talking with him, and he gave an example about he was going to school and two black guys beat him up. And that's just total foolishness. That doesn't count at all. White people can handle that easily, and it didn't stop him from going to school. I mean, lots of people get bullied growing up. Lots of children get in fights and skirmishes going to school. We're talking about wide-scale white people, large numbers of them not being able to go to school, not being able to go to college, not being able to get a loan, not being able to get quality housing, not being able to get employment. We're talking about large numbers of white people being denied resources or harmed unjustly. And I can't think of an example of that either. Now, the converse side, you already said. You can think of a lot of examples of black people large numbers of black people being harmed by white people in all areas of People Act. Everything I just named. Not being able to go to school, not being able to get loans for housing, not being able to get a job, not being able to serve in well, not that you want to be doing that anyway, but not being able to serve in the armed forces. All areas of people activity. Laws being made specifically to harm black people. And all over the world, we could think of examples of that. That right there, in my view, illustrates the impossibility of black people to practice racism against white people. Really, for any non-white people on the planet right now to practice racism against white people. And it would go to having a definition. Do you have a definition for what racism means?
Well, I believe it's when, so far as, well, It goes both ways. It goes for black people. My definition, it goes for black people and also white people. I believe black people can be racist against white people because of, you know, what happened in the past. I always believe that. But we're not responsible for what happened in the past, you know, and it goes the same way as white people. You know, they're racist against black people for what happened in the past also.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I just don't agree. I don't agree with it.
Okay. I didn't, and I might have misheard you, but I didn't really hear a definition for racism. I don't think I heard one at all. One thing that I will start with, definitions are extremely important, and having a clear definition with regards to terms. With racism, it is extremely important to have a definition for what you mean when you use the term racism. And I understand that, you know, many different people have many different definitions. I just try to ask people what is their definition for racism so I can be clear about what they're talking about. Number two.
Okay.
And I hope that makes sense, right? Number two, definitions have to make sense. Like this program, Context of White Supremacy, the definitions have to make sense in the context of the world in which we live. Now, the world in which we live, you and I, we just sat and we thought about it. We couldn't think of any examples of black people practicing racism or black people harming large numbers of white people. We couldn't think of any examples. We could think of a lot of examples of white people harming large numbers of black people, but we couldn't think of any examples of black people harming lots of white people. In my view, that to me means that it's not possible for black people, at least up to this point, it has not been possible for black people to practice racism. So our definition would have to reflect that, meaning whatever definition that we have of racism, it would have to reflect black people currently are not capable of practicing racism. There's no evidence that black people have harmed large numbers of white people on the basis of them being white. There's no evidence of that. So whatever definition of racism that we use, it has got to show, hey, this is something that black people are not capable of doing. Frequently, what we're talking about is black people being the victims of racism. So the definition that I use for racism, and I attach it to the term white supremacy, to try to make it very clear, because it's been my experience that the logic takes over, right? I have to use a lot fewer words when I'm saying white supremacy, because generally no one ever says, hey, Gus, can a black person be a white supremacist? I rarely have that conversation. I can't even think of the last time. White people, non-white people, no one says, don't you think you got black people that are white supremacists? The logic tends to take over that you have got to be a white person to practice white supremacy. So one of the things that I do, I connect racism to the term white supremacy. I mean, they're synonyms. So like you can say that someone is large, you can say that they're big. Those two terms mean the same thing. Racism and white supremacy mean the same thing. White supremacy is black people not being able to get quality schools. Racism is black people not being able to get quality schools. Racism, white supremacy is black people. Trayvon Martin situation, Aiyana Jones situation, that is racism, white supremacy. President Obama having all these white people being historically rude and disrespectful to him and his wife and children, name calling him, name calling her, interrupting him when he's going out to give speeches and what have you. The white woman in Arizona wagging her finger in his face, things that have never been done in the history of this country to any other white president. There's another example. Things that have never happened in the history of this country to any other white president. Now all of a sudden you have every other day when he goes out to give a speech, he's getting interrupted and people yelling for him to shut up and you lie. That is racism, white supremacy. They're one and the same. Racism is white supremacy. White supremacy is racism. Now, the definition that I use, and again, people have many different definitions. The definition that I use for both terms, I use the same definition for racism and white supremacy. The definition that I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. That's the definition that I use for racism and white supremacy. And generally, I don't know if you've heard you said your daughter listens. Generally, I will connect those two terms. So I'll say them, I'll like have a little hyphen in between or a dash. So it'll be racism, white supremacy. I'll say them to keep them connected so that people think that way, that this is the same thing. Racism and white supremacy, we're talking about the same thing. When people say, oh, I think it's racism, what happened to Trayvon Martin, I think it's racism, it's white supremacy. Oh, I think it's racism, what they're doing, the way that they're treating President Obama and calling him a gorilla and an ape, it's white supremacy. Same thing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And did you talk to your daughter? Did you say she listened to the program? Did you ask your daughter, like, do you think black people can be racist? Did you ask her that question?
Well, yes, I did. And basically, she said the same thing you said.
Oh, okay. When she said it, did it make sense?
Yeah, it did, but I just couldn't understand her because, coming from you, she just wasn't brought up that way, to think that way. So I said, well, if you think, white people, do you mean all white people? Yes, all white people, she says, are racist. I said, no, black people are racism also. I tried to tell her, but she was trying to explain it to me, and I just really didn't comprehend because it was coming from my daughter.
Okay.
And I wanted to hear it, from someone else.
Okay. That makes sense. Two things I guess I would point out. Number one, now I didn't say all white people are racist. Did you hear me say that?
Okay. No, you didn't.
Okay. I'm not saying she's incorrect. I want to say that too, but I just want to emphasize I didn't say all white people are racist. What I would encourage, and this is, just something for you to ponder on. We've talked about that a lot during this program. People taking time to think about things. Right? So if you take a stroll or if you have some quiet time, just think about what does it mean to be a white person. I think that's something that black people generally, we don't think about. We get caught up in thinking it's skin color. And, my view, if you know what color Elmer's glue is, right? Or computer paper, generally speaking, is white. You've never seen a white person that is the color of Elmer's glue or computer paper. Right? So it's not that their skin is the color white. It's something else. I would just, think about what does it mean to be a white person? That would be number one. And the second thing I would say to just think about, and you can maybe even talk to your daughter about this. Think about this. Now, you and I, we sat and we took some time to try to think of some examples of black people being racist against white people. Black people harming white people just because they're white. We couldn't think of any. Have you been able to think of any since I asked you earlier?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Now, if we can't think of any examples of a black person harming white people, practicing racism against a white person, why, when your daughter was talking to you, it seemed like your reaction, maybe your instinctual reaction was to say that, hey, wait a minute, black people can be racist too. I would say think about that. Why, when you were talking to your daughter, why did you say that you think black people can be racist too, even though you can't think of any examples of black people being racist against white people? I would say to think about that. Do you think that's interesting?
Very interesting.
I think that
because I know a lot of black people, they don't like white people. And I don't understand why. You said a lot of black people don't like white people, and you don't understand why? Yes, I know. Yes, I know a lot of black people that don't. They just don't care for white people. They just they call them devils. They just don't like white people. And I'm friends with a lot of white people.
Wow.
I just don't understand.
That's interesting. Have you talked to some of these black people that don't like white people? Like, have you asked them about their experience, like how white people have treated them and, you know, just their general experience with white people?
No, I haven't.
Oh, maybe that would reveal some things. Maybe you could, I don't know, some of these people, if you're friends with them or if you have contact with them, maybe you could ask them, like, why you keep, it sounds like you don't like white people, or you're saying that you don't like white people, or you're calling them devils. What has your experience been with white people? And maybe they could, you know, tell you some of their experiences, you know, how white people have treated them, why they've come to that conclusion.
Well, I speak for myself. Well, so far as some white people, I'm not going to say all white people. I'll be in the store sometime, you know, when they hand you back the change. Some of them, now they act like they don't want to touch your hand. They like drop the money in your hand, or sometime later on the counter. Now I experienced, you know, stuff like that, but you know, those are maybe one of the few, you know, but they all are not like that.
I would totally agree that you have a lot of white people who are not that way. They would not throw your change at you if you went in the store. They would not call you a nigger or any other racist names. You have a lot of white people like you even have a lot of white people who would be down to be your quote unquote friend, whatever that means. That's another one definition. Who would be down to be your quote unquote friend, maybe even to marry you, have sex. You have a lot of white people like that. At the end of the day, it comes down to, what does it mean to be a white person? And do you think it's possible for a white person to be friends with a black person, to have sex with a black person, to marry a black person, spend a lot of time with a black person, and to still be a racist? Do you think it's possible for a white person to do all of those things and to still be a racist?
I don't think so, because, like, for instance, my niece is getting married tomorrow to a white guy.
Oh, no.
This is her second marriage. This is her second marriage to a white guy. And we're going to the wedding. And I asked my daughter early, a couple months ago, are you going to the wedding? And she said, oh, no, she doesn't approve of it. She said that's just against her belief. You know, she said she shouldn't be marrying a white person. And I just don't agree with that. You can't pick and choose who you fall in love with.
Fall in love. That's it's interesting phrasing. Wow, that is salute to your daughter. I don't know who she is. She listened to the program. Salute to your daughter. Right on. That is phenomenal counter-racist work. Woohoo! I wouldn't go to the wedding either. That being said,
wow.
I would, some of that would come down to definitions, you know, what does it mean to be a racist? Because I think, we can stop right there. What's your definition for a racist? Do you have, if you don't have one, that's fine.
A black person. Oh, I do.
Oh, okay.
Like I said before, a black person not liking a white person, you know, for what happened in the past. Or just don't like a white person, period.
Wow.
That's one thing I can think of.
Wow.
And sometimes they don't even have a reason. They can't even tell you.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. Particularly given, you know, your definition for a racist. You said a black person who doesn't like a white person for things that happened in the past. I think that is fascinating. And that's the second time, right? That's the second time that you have, in defining racist and in defining racism, you have referenced black people being racist or practicing racism. But you and I both have not been able to come up with examples of black people harming other white people. Now, you said that you do know some black people who don't like white people. I don't think that's racism if you don't like somebody. If you're a black person and you just say you don't like white people, I don't think that's racist. Let's put it like this.
What would you call it?
If I'm gonna give you an example. If slavery, right? They say that you did have formal slavery in this area of the world and other parts, but you had formal slavery. If we were slaves on the plantation, white people, quote unquote, owned us, if we didn't like the slave master, would we be racist? Oh, we lost our caller. I thought our caller dropped. I'm not sure if she hung up or what have you. Perhaps she'll dial back in. Fascinating. Wowee. If she calls back in, I'll open the line. We went a bit off track, but hopefully we can weave back in. You might have to give me a second to get my bearings as to where we were in the book. That would have been better for the Saturday program. It would have been interesting to see how some other folks would have handle that call, because that might not be the best way to handle it. At any rate, yeah, that would be better for Saturday. That might not be the best way to handle it. Maybe some of you all out there could give a better demonstration of how to have dialogue with victims who are a bit more confused, right? And at least to get them to think a little bit. At any rate, I hope, if anything, definitions. Whoa! And again, that is kindergarten logic. I try to be careful about saying that if I'm talking to somebody and they're using a term and they don't have a definition, or it seems like they're trying to make a definition up on the spot. I try to be careful about saying that that's kindergarten logic, because they might take it as me putting them down. But, I mean, I had elementary school teachers tell me way early in the game, do not use terms if you do not know what they mean, because you cannot be certain about what you are saying. That is, that is a rule you should have at all times. Like, let me be real careful about these terms, and let me make sure that they make sense. Fascinating. I might even have to make that a sound clip of her talking about race, not putting her down, but I mean, it was just fascinating. When she was talking about racism and referencing that black people can practice racism, but then she couldn't think of any examples. That, again, context is very important. Things have to make sense in context. All right, getting back on track. I lost my place. You had to give me a second. I feel like I need a commercial break to get my bearings, to figure out where we are in the book, and the whole night. I almost told her at the beginning, this is off topic. We're on the book, and this is not what we're supposed to be doing today. But I hope that was a constructive investment of a few minutes, 5 minutes or so. Instead of a commercial, I'll take a moment in racism. This will be related. It's all connected, I think, to Yurugu as well. You can dial in 760 if you want to help us get back on topic. If you have something in Yurugu you want to talk about, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. I was going to tell this story as well, because this happened to me 2 days ago. I was out. I'm giving you the condensed version. I was out having my stroll. I was breaking part of my code. I had a victim admonish me about being out and walking around out of the house, like away from the immediate area of the house after 11. As a black male, that is not a safe thing to do, might not be the smart thing to do. Particularly, I'm in Washington State, an area where there are not a lot of black people. You're around a lot of white people. You could get, George Zimmerman. So yeah, that is part of my code. I broke my code. At any rate, so I'm out and I'm thinking, I'm having my stroll, and I see some black people. I stop, I ask them some questions, get some information. We talked about racism, was very interesting. Fast forwarding, I see some white people, and I'm feeling like, man, I should have stopped and asked those white people some questions. They're the people that question white people. That's what this is all about. So I said, okay, I'm going to think of some questions to ask these white people. So I go over to the white people. Question number one, the obvious one. Are you white? They both say yes. It was a white man, white woman. Question number two. I said, do you assume that other white people are racist? And they took a moment and they said, I don't assume anyone is racist. And I said, wow, that's interesting. And the male, he said, yeah, I like to give people, that they're innocent. I don't go in with the presumption that anyone is racist. I go in and they have an opportunity to prove me wrong, but no, I don't go in thinking that someone is racist. And the female, she, agreed, echoed, yeah, I don't go in thinking that people are racist. And I walked away and I said, oh, okay, wow, that's interesting. And I said, yeah, black people, we can't take that stance. Forget that. That's crazy. I can't have that assumption. And I stopped and I said, now, did I ask all the questions that should have been asked? And I said, no, probably not. Let me think. What should I have asked? What should I have asked? I said, oh, wait a minute. And I went back and I said, has anyone ever practiced racism against you? And we had a pause. And it was like he was going back in his memory and he thought, the white man. And he said, no, I can't think of a time where anyone has practiced racism against me. And the white woman, she said, yeah, nope. Can't think of any time where someone's practiced racism against me. I thank you kindly. I walked away. I said, yes, black, we cannot take that stance. Heck no, I have too many examples where I think people have practiced racism against me. I cannot have an assumption that white people are not racist. I have got to be thinking the opposite. These people are probably racist. And I think this does come up in the chapter. I have to kind of look at my notes to dig where she's talking about. I think it's in nationalism. It's in chapter 8, I think, where she's talking about nationalism, how white people try to give this perception that that nationalism is a bad thing and we shouldn't be nationalists. And she talks about the difference between white nationalism, which is racism, white supremacy, and nationalism for black people and or non-white people, which would be a counter-racist effort, the way that she breaks it down. This does come up in the book, but yeah, hopefully this was not too much of a deviation, benefit to some people. I think our caller, she didn't call back in, so yeah, we'll get back on track with Yurugu moving forward. Very interesting. Shout out to the daughter, whomever that was. Outstanding counter-racist code. I am not going to any sort of tragic arrangement ceremonies. Phenomenal. Okay, I was on 376. We'll move to 376. Unless folks have any questions and or comments, we'll wrap up in like 15 minutes. Unless folks have some questions, comments. Hasn't been that much participation today relative to the book. There hasn't been that much participation. This is on 376. Same chapter. Intracultural behavior. White people and how they conduct themselves with other white people. 376, top of the page. Interpersonal behavior among European American peoples is competitive, aggressive, exploitative, and based on European defined survivalism, one made necessary by the nature of the culture itself. This behavior is, therefore, characterized by hostility and defensiveness. The European personality is, above all, a product of a conception of self that isolates the individual. He alone and lost my place. Sorry. He is alone and vulnerable, surrounded by other alone, vulnerable, and therefore defensive personalities. Once past the level of the primary ideological substratum of the culture, which tends to bind European individuals together, there is no identification between him and other individuals within the culture. Beyond this, there is no commonality. He defines himself as their opposite and his interest as opposed to or in conflict with theirs, meaning at the level of secondary or derived values is determined by the needs of survival among hostile beings. The culture into which the individual is born provides him with an individualistic and isolating concept of self, while it fails to provide him with a spiritual base of emotional inspiration and support. With these givens, he has no choice but to go out about the business of surviving as best he can. He is indeed in a jungle, and initially, defensive posture soon becomes aggressively offensive behavior. The individual perceives that the best way to assure his own survival is to disarm others, to beat them, to win, to get ahead, to usurp the objects of value before they do, to control them. He must do all of these things before they are done to him. That becomes the golden rule. To make matters worse, the culture thrives on violence, and it is becoming more intense. The popular media is a laboratory for the study of the European American need for violence. This is all on 376. Absolutely. Pulp Fiction, man. Anything Quentin Tarantino has done really is just an ode to violence. And again, this is someone, he wrote the story for Natural Born Killers. Reservoir Dogs, they chop off a man's ear, slaughtering people left and right. White people say this is a cult classic. Pulp Fiction, you have a black male being anally raped, people being shot and killed left and right. A white man, Bruce Willis character, he beats a black male to death. Blows John Travolta, he blows that brains of a black male all over the inside of a vehicle. Kill Bill, a white woman, she kills scores, dozens of non-white Asian males. I even noticed, I was watching it to do this video and my study on Quentin Tarantino's films. Uma Thurman's character in Kill Bill Volume 1, you have a white woman, a single white woman. That film, she is basically going out and slaughtering large numbers of non-white people, all film long. I think she kills 2 white males at the very beginning, and they were raping her. She kills them, but for the rest of the film, she is killing black and non-white people the whole way, slaughtering large numbers of so-called Asian males, Asian females. She kills black female. Vivica A. Fox kills her in front of her daughter. This is racist television. What did she say? The popular media is a laboratory for the study of the European American need for violence. Quentin Tarantino, man. Django Unchained coming out on December 25th. Jackie Brown also came out on December 25th, 1996, I think. I might be off on the year, but I think it was 1996. Jackie Brown with Pam Grier. Chris Tucker, he gets shot in the back of a truck. Second time in a Quentin Tarantino film where you see a black male get blown away in a vehicle, stuffed in the trunk of a vehicle. The second time a black male gets blown away and stuffed in the trunk of a vehicle. Quentin Tarantino films. Anywho, we got our caller. Our caller in Indiana, give me 1 second, because this program we're supposed to be talking about our book, and I do like to stay on task to what we're doing. But since we don't really have participation from folks, I don't know if people haven't been keeping up with the reading or what the deal is. If you give me, I said 15, so if you give me 7 minutes. If we don't have anybody that calls in, I'll get our caller. I think she dialed back in, our caller in Indiana. We'll get her back on, see what else she has to share. So you're on the timetable. If anybody out, if you have been keeping up with the reading and you have comments about what we've been talking about with Yurugu, you got 7 minutes to dial in. If you have anything you want to share, caller in Brooklyn and S. Your line should be open as well if you have anything you want to share about Yurugu.
You can
both be heard.
Go for it. All right.
No, go ahead first.
I was just going to ask, Gus, have you seen, I think one of Quentin Tarantino's, because I used to be, all into, I used to be pretty white identified. Have you ever seen the movie Killing Zoe?
No, sir.
Yeah, you should check that one out. It just adds, just to have more. It's just more of the same. But I think that was one of Quentin Tarantino's first movies. But yeah, full of the anal fixation and lots of, it's just, yeah, you should check it out. Killing Zoe. But which part were you talking about in Yurugu?
Most recently, or?
Yeah, you were on page 380 or 370.
The most recent page that I read was 376 about the competition, aggressive and exploitative nature of the white culture and being isolated. Okay.
Yeah, that definitely popped out to me. A great little blurb of white people in a few sentences. And it keeps on coming back to that, the Oedipus complex, and then 378. Let's see, 378. It's like they kind of create these rules so that they can break them. But there's no limit to what they can do to us. 380, or 378. First paragraph talking about myths allow people to imagine what they cannot do. Sagan continues, Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. Zeus overthrows his father, Uranus. In Sagan's view, these myths have a healthy psychocultural function, but Homer's consistent message is that rebellion against authority leads to disaster. Sagan says that the Greeks considered offenses against the father as the greatest sin, hubris. This is clearly a reinforcement of the patriarchal worldview. For Sagan, Achilles' violent behavior when he fails in his rebellion against Agamemnon is like the tantrum of a little boy which threatens to take the culture back to a state of barbarism. I was just watching a documentary on the Dark Ages, and it's just like all the words connotated with darkness, and like there's no black people around. It's like they're talking about Dark Ages, the Black Plague, knights, the knight figure who's like, wreaking havoc. It's supposed to be a hero, but now we found out they're just like kind of like mafia henchmen basically. But and then she goes into later about the projection, the way that they project all their bad qualities onto other people so that they can have this healthy release, like a release valve on all their inner turmoil that they just would destroy themselves, so they just have to turn it into something that works for them. So they put it all outside themselves ideologically, and then they give themselves a reason to carry out that drive on the other people that they've defined as being worthy of all their disrespect and murderous, killing and stealing. Yeah, that's all. You can go ahead, other callers.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking earlier about breeding a culture of violence was particularly the film where it was George S. Patton, and he's giving that speech in front of the American flag, and giving these very graphic illustrations of what he wants the soldiers to do to the enemy. He wants to tear out their hearts and rip off their heads, and all these very graphic descriptions. And it also makes me think about how it seems to be a common theme of pitting so-called capitalists against socialists, against communists, and all of these terminologies are all outgrowths of expressions of European domination. So the focus continues to be on having people align themselves with the more dominant form of Europeanism, whether it's going to be socialism, communism, or capitalism, so that each person who is underneath those particular systems, each non-white person, is supposed to claim a certain allegiance to that ideological belief system. And if not, for instance, in the United States, when an individual expressed any views that talked about social justice or so forth, they were branded a communist, and oftentimes I hear folks accuse President Obama of being a socialist, and that's one thing that I hear a lot of white folks do. But when you press them as to what exactly makes them a socialist, many times they can't give you any concrete examples of what a socialist is or what exactly he does that makes him a socialist. So these are little word games that they play. And I wanted to draw your attention to paragraph on page 381. I'll read it. It's the second paragraph, and it reads, the characteristics we have discussed are basically those that determine European interpersonal behavior. The institutions and forms of the culture can be understood as structured sets of rules that are based on these given norms and that act to regulate the behavior of individuals so that a support system for their intercultural behavior is maintained. In other words, what accounts for the survival of the culture as a cohesive whole is the ideological objective of the control and subjugation of all other peoples and the related commitment to the technological and material superiority. A friend of mine points out that Europeans would indeed destroy each other if they did not have others to destroy. And that's a particular line I want to repeat. A friend of mine points out that Europeans would indeed destroy each other if they did not have others to destroy. By the same token, the integrative function of the culture could not have survived so long. The disintegrative tendencies of the individualistic ethic had it not been for the outwardly directed imperialistic objective and quest for world supremacy. That quest is definitive of the European Udamoroho and the emotional satisfaction itself a negation of spirit with which members of the European culture identify. And that just makes me think about how often it appears that European culture seems to be like they had the so-called Cold War where it was against Soviet Union, against communism, where they were so-called fighting each other. But now that China embraces what they consider to be a communist philosophy or ideology, that seems to be their boogeyman right now. That's just what I wanted to add.
I'm going to get our female caller in Indiana. Thank you for your patience. Give me 1 second. There was one other caller that dialed in. I wanted to see if they had anything Yurugu related. Person 8225, your line should be open. Did you have something Yurugu related? 8225.
Shooby-Doo. I don't know. I think this book, it like you do with your deja vu moments, it kind of like you already knew it, but it clarifies. So that's why I think a lot of people, probably myself included, aren't really calling in. I could be wrong, but I took a lot of notes on the book, and you touched upon a lot of interesting stuff. But I am interested to hear this caller and you go back and forth. So go right ahead.
Right on. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think a lot of it, once you get past that first 150, bang, it gets much easier to read. And I think a lot of it, it just makes sense. It's obvious. Once you get that white chip to calm down a little bit, it makes perfect sense what she's saying. It's self-evident. I will share one more part before I get our caller, see what she has today. Maybe she's been thinking if we could be racist if we did not like the slave master on the plantation. I'm on page... I'll do my Dahmer part and then 412 and 14. My Dahmer was on 397. 397. All right, 397. Okay, she says, this is, I guess, bottom paragraph, 1, 2, third. Like third paragraph, I guess, fourth maybe if you count the quote in the middle. Ordinary love is problematical in European culture. What this means is that in order for an individual who has been socialized in the European tradition to act with love, she must overcome her traditions, which are powerful. She must overcome the ontological, epistemological presuppositions with which she has been inculcated and the constraints of social institutions that surround her. She will then risk being unsuccessful as she she will then risk being unsuccessful, as success in European culture depends on competitiveness and aggression, not love. She will find herself surrounded by individuals who cannot, dare not, return her love. When love is translated into the terms of human phenomenal reality for the European white people, its interpretation issues from a bedrock of chronic illness, fear, and aggression. These inherited ancestral experiences generate an obsessive possessiveness, a clinging, smothering, narcissistic, and compulsively unrealistic, romantic, in quotes, conception of what love should be. I immediately thought of Jeffrey Dahmer, and I would have sound clipped it, but that was too many sound clips for me to hook up for the program. But you can dig back when we've had 2 programs on Dahmer. Robert Dvorak, when he was on talking about his biography on Dahmer, and Dahmer said that exactly. He was carving up black victims and non-white victims. Most of his victims were non-white, most of them black males. He said that he wanted to have his victims. He wanted to have them, control them forever. He felt like if he didn't kill them and eat them, that they would leave. And he didn't want them to leave. He wanted them to be there. He wanted to have control over them forever. And he said that even impacted his ingesting of their flesh and the body parts. That way he could have a part of them forever. He would be consuming them, and that would then, become a part of himself. Total Jeffrey Dahmer. That's racist, man. That's why you never, ever, never, ever, never want white friends or any sort of sexual relationship with a white person. Jeffrey Dahmer. The next section I'll read, then we'll get our call if she's hanging out. Thank you for your patience again, Indiana. 412 and 414. I'm going to read a paragraph on 412 and then hop over to 412 because it's related. All right, so on 412, this second paragraph, and this is, we've hopped into chapter 8. We only did a little bit of chapter 8. Most of that will be next week, so we'll probably come back to a lot of this next Friday. But chapter 8 is white people relating to black people, the others, and the standards, codes of conduct with others. In fact, the title of the chapter, Behavior Towards Others. And I will read Ayi Kwei Arma, his quote to begin the chapter. Wherever there is life, even if it be only a possibility, the harbingers of death must go to destroy it. See the footsteps they have left over all the world. Wherever they have been, they have destroyed along their road, taking. Ayi Kwei Arma. That quote is on the top of 401, the beginning of chapter 8. I would highly recommend Arma, and Dr. Anishi highly recommends Dr. Chinwizu's book, The West and the Rest of Us. Phenomenal read. He was on the program in May of 2011. You can hit the archives. Okay, 412, second paragraph. She's talking about the purpose of giving an air of legality when white people go to terrorize non-white people. Another purpose of the establishment of the colonial government is to give the illusion of a kind of legality, propriety, or ethical presence that does not exist. There is no European concept of legality that extends to non-European, non-white people. It is the traditional political strategy of the European to create the impression that such exists, thereby disarming the cultural other non-white person whom they exploit, as well as those within their culture who purport to be concerned with the well-being of the exploited peoples. If this aspect of European behavior could be understood by peoples of majority cultures, it would be to their distinct political advantage. It is perhaps more significant than any other single behavioral characteristic. There simply are no guiding rules of conduct, no limitations, no inhibitions in the Europeans' relationship with the cultural other, non-white people. Therefore, the first and most important political achievement for us is to recognize that we are ultimately and inevitably, in the Europeans' worldview, cultural others. Next, the implications of this concept for European behavior must be understood. It then becomes easy to anticipate their behavior in the intercultural arena. If those who have been objects of European aggression begin to understand the cultural context of that aggression, the asili, or germinating core of the culture that explains it, they will be much more successful in countering it. White people. I'm skipping to 414, second paragraph. But why do Europeans go to the trouble of creating the appearance of legality in their dealings with majority peoples? Why not simply steal and exploit without the charade? The answer is, number one, that this acting out constitutes a strategical tool that politically disarms the victims of European expansion, and number two, it plays an important part in the maintenance and support of the European self-image. The importance of this self-image must not be underestimated. One of the deepest beliefs of the European is the related notions of civilization, progress, and the evolutionary superiority of their culture. The concept of codified law is a definitive ingredient of civilization. For with civilization, according to European ideology, comes order, and legality assures lasting order, not moral conduct, but consistent and predictable conduct. So that the civilized way, the European way, is to bring laws, however forcibly, and the structures of European culture, civilization in quotes, to those whom one treats immorally and for whom one has no respect. Along with development, this justifies expansionism, for after all, Europeans bring law and order to people who must have previously lived quite disorderly lives, or so white people believe. Quote-unquote, good law is written law and therefore truly legal. Unwritten law is not really law. It is bad and backward. How many times have the victims of European hypocrisy been duped into trying to deal with those laws rather than with the true nature of the European ethic? What to say? Phenomenal, Dr. Marimba Ani. All right, I will get our caller in Indiana, unless, if any folks have Yurugu questions. I would rather hear that, truthfully, because that's what we're supposed to be doing, the Yurugu session, not, being sidetracked, although that is of some value. Any other thoughts on Yurugu, that section, or any other parts of the text?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Just to piggyback on what you just said, on 416, I took down a note. Let me read it. The separation of morality and law, the phenomenon of mass hypocrisy, the separation of emotional commitment from action are all encouraged by the European tradition in the use of words without meaning. To be civilized is to be able to hide one's true motives, and civilization is the appearance of a moral order that does not exist. If these things are understood, then it is more easily realized that to be a cultural other implies that there are no laws that govern or inhibit the Europeans' behavior towards you. And I'll stop there.
It reminded me of it's a black male. He authored August 28th, 1963, March on Washington, Castrated Giant. Michael Thelwell, black male. His name is Michael Thelwell. He was talking about, during the Civil Rights Movement, how they were, campaigning, making speeches for the Civil Rights Bill that ultimately passed after Kennedy was assassinated in '64. And he was saying that that's not the problem. He was saying that if more laws would solve the problem of racism, white supremacy, we wouldn't have this issue in the first place. We do not need more laws to solve the problem of racism. And I think I read that after I read Yurugu, but whoa, phenomenal point that I don't think black people have really understood, that getting a new piece of paper with white people's signature on it that they're going to do this or they're going to do that, or they're not going to practice racism, that they're going to do right by you, is absolutely worthless. It means about as much as a $4 bill.
Absolutely. It's all an interpretation, and in that they will alternately use either logic and ration, what they term to be that, or the rhetorical, emotional epic, which is to say, and they'll use it conversely. So if it was they're trying to explain why a black person is guilty, they'll say, you know, laws are laws, rules are rules. But you know, when it suits him, he acted with extreme emotion and, you know, rage. And for them as well, they'll say, you know, can't you understand, Your Honor, you know, have a heart. And then they'll say, these are the rules, you know, rule for this person, this white person, because those are the rules. So, you know, it's all an interpretation and who has the final say in that. So any law, you know, just like the Singer Graham law, it depends on when you feel like pulling that card out. And that's all up to who has the interpretation, and this is their system. So
I would add that an example of this is the recent controversy with President Obama and his exercising so-called executive privilege. The very fact that he's raising that as a standard of why he's not going to answer to these blatantly, overtly racist other politicians who want to bully his administration that he's been granted the appearance of authority over, shows that you can think that you have a law or you can exercise a law, but they're going to play word games with you, because the very same executive privilege is what what was used by Dick Cheney, and they were very supportive of that. But for him to exercise that same executive privilege in this situation, they're having a field day and saying otherwise. And then another example would be, now they're talking about allowing so-called Latinos the privilege, if you will, to be able to become naturalized citizens or so forth. And that's just more word games that they're playing. Because the bottom line is, whether they allow them to become citizens or not, that's not going to change the fact that they're still being subjugated and they're being oppressed as a group of people, non-white people.
I would also add this in the hate crime laws being, they're trying to use them against black people now as well. So, you know, any law they're going to put in, it's, you know, there's going to be a flip side to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts, commentary around Yurugu? Most of this chapter, the bulk of it, will be next week. I think we only read like the first 7-10 pages of chapter 8, behavior toward others, non-white people. So most of this we'll be coming back to and getting into more detail about it next week. But the passage, I didn't want to read it again because I read it when we did the compensatory call-in about this book. That was one of the sections that I read where she was talking about Libya and Bush saying he's a terrorist. We got to go in and attack him. Wow, you know, it has so much more meaning now, 2012, given what's been happening in that area of the world over the past 18 months or so. But the same verbiage. Different administration, so-called non-white person allegedly in charge, and the same verbiage, same justification for violence against non-white people in that area of the world. Just standard operating procedure for racist man, racist woman, racist child. I did want to note that, but wasn't going to read it again. I don't like repeating myself. Any other commentary around Yurugu? Any of the folks?
I would like to add that I thought of something when you're talking about, the caller was talking about Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey, and it made me think of Black History Month and how, you try to include, Black Americans in, the history book. And what we know about the polarity of it is true, then without Black history, you are omitting the good guy. And all that implies, so it makes total sense that Gaddafi's always a terrorist, or you see what they value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just thinking about that, if you go back and you look at the transcripts of the trial for Denmark Vesey, you'll note that one of the reasons why they tried to suppress so much information about the trials and even the trials of Nat Turner is because those individuals were quoting the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as being what inspired them for these acts. And they did not want other rank and file black people to hear them hear these black people openly talking about all men are created equal and so forth. So therefore, this is why historically they have expunged as much information as possible about any of those three individuals or anyone else.
Absolutely. They are very good at that. Very good at that. Even more recent figures, they are very good at distorting legacy of non-white people. Any non-white person who actively worked against racism, white supremacy, you can guarantee once you have expired, white people are going to be working furiously to rewrite anything you might have said, erase it, lose it, bury it, destroy it, say a white person did it, anything, so that non-white people do not have examples of non-white people to identify with and study who were actively working against racism, white supremacy, to distort what you're doing. Same thing you saw with Malcolm X, Minister Malcolm, last year, and saying that he was down for gay rights. He was so-called homosexual himself. Standard operating procedure for racist man, racist woman, racist child.
I would agree, and I think that's exactly why the book A Life of Reinvention by Manning Marable just won a Pulitzer Prize. I think that it's befitting that they gave this individual this Pulitzer Prize after he passed away. They published this manuscript after he passed away because it made more sense for him to not be alive and to have people who were actually there who could have refuted much of the material that was in the manuscript to begin with. So in order to publish it after he passes away and then to give it a Pulitzer Prize, one of their most esteemed awards, puts it at a place where it now becomes the defining document of who Malcolm X is. Now, that does not negate the fact that I think that there were some very interesting historical facts and tidbits that were covered in the book that he shared that may not have come to light in previous other books on Malcolm X, Minister Malcolm. But I realized that it was very political, that they waited until the time that he passed away, the author, and put this manuscript out, and that they now have given it a Pulitzer Prize. And I noticed that many so-called black scholars, academics, are, for the most part, heralding this as the definitive work on the life of Malcolm X. Anyone out there who reads that book, I would also encourage them to read. There's a commentary that's edited by Malana Karenga and Haku Matahabudi, which is called By Any Means Necessary, Malcolm X, Real, Not Reinvented. And it's critical conversations on Manning Marable's biography of Malcolm X. So I would encourage them to read that commentary as well. If you're going to read the other book, to hear some feedback from some other scholars who actually had firsthand accounts, conversations with Malcolm X, or had a different perspective, so that you can draw your own conclusions.
Excellent information. Excellent info. Yeah, white, as you said, political. I think that's one of the major points that Dr. Ani makes throughout the book. Everything white people do is political. I wouldn't care if they're about getting in the bedroom with you, if they're trying to get you to get this book, if they're praising this film or this book. Everything that they do is political and about the politics of maintaining, expanding, refining white terrorism, the system of white supremacy worldwide. I will check in with our caller in Indiana. You all's lines will still be open, so we got about 15 minutes left in the program. If she does, once we finish up with her questions, if anybody has anything else they want to get in, feel free. Yeah, we'll see. Our caller in Indiana, thank you for being patient. Your line should be open as well. If this is still, I guess, the mother that we were speaking with before, did you think in the interval between when you got disconnected and when you called back in, if we were on the plantation, if we were slaves, if we didn't like the slave master, would that make us racist?
No, I don't. No.
We would. So if we were black, we're slaves, white slave master, we're on the plantation, we don't like the slave master, that doesn't make us racist.
The slave master is a white master?
Correct.
No, we wouldn't like him. I wouldn't.
Right. The way you say it, it sounds like it would be logical for us to dislike the slave master if we were slaves in that situation. Am I understanding that correctly? The way that you responded, it sounded as if it would be logical for the slaves to dislike the slave master.
Okay. As being black myself, and if I was a slave, and you asking me would I like my slave master?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, is it a white slave master?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I wouldn't like him.
Okay. Would it be logical for you to dislike your white slave master?
No, it wouldn't.
It would not be logical. When I ask that question, just so making sure that you understand what I'm asking, just does it make sense? Does it seem reasonable if the slaves, the black slaves, have some anger directed towards their white slave master? Does it seem reasonable if the slaves have some dislike for the white slave masters? Does that seem reasonable? Does that seem logical?
Yes, it is very logical. I would say very logical. Yes.
Okay. What I would assert, and I could be incorrect, the system of racism, white supremacy, which, I say exists, When I gave you my definition of racism before, I think that's in effect worldwide. I'll say it again. Global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Now, I say that what I just laid out in that definition, that system unfortunately exists worldwide, and that is responsible for black people, millions of black people, non-white people being abused, terrorized worldwide, all sorts of situations going down that should not be happening. Black people being unjustly incarcerated, harmed by enforcement officers, black people not getting correct housing, not getting the help they need when they need it. Non-white people and black people worldwide, just bad things happening to them because of racism, white supremacy, and specifically white people practicing racism, white supremacy. Now, if that's happening, I think it's the same, really it is the same thing. It's just in a different form. We just don't have the shackles and we're not, on the formal plantation, but I mean the same power relationship still exists between victims of racism, slaves, and the racist white supremacists, the white people who practice racism, white supremacy. You still got that same power relationship, an unjust mistreatment of people that are classified as non-white by individuals who say that they're white. So for me, I understand if black people, if they say that they're angry with white people, that they don't like white people, if they're saying that I'm not going to the wedding, or even calling white people devils. Now I don't do the name calling. I don't think we should be name calling anyone, but I understand that. To me, it makes logical sense. It's the slave having some animosity directed towards the white slave master. I understand that totally. And just because you don't like a white person doesn't mean that you are a racist. And I say that because we have to go back to what we said at the very beginning. Have you been able to think, even since you hung up, have you been able to think of any examples of a black person or groups of black people being able to mistreat large numbers of white people? Have you been able to come up with any examples?
No, I haven't.
Okay. That right there, for as many black, and I've met a lot too. You say you know a lot, and I've met a lot too. For all the black people that I have heard who say that they don't like white people and white devil this and white cracker this, none of them seem to have any power to harm white people. That right there is a lot. I mean, that right there is exactly what's going on the plantation. Slaves can sit around all day long and talk about how they don't like massa. They're upset with him. No good massa and cracker this. They can call him names and all that. But at the end of the day, they are still slaves. They still got to get up and do whatever Massa says. Massa says you got to get up at 5 and go pick cotton. That's what you'll be doing. You can call him names all day while you're doing it, maybe. But you'll still be doing what Master says. And that is the exact same relationship that I see to this day. White people who will complain about white people on their job that they don't like, that they feel are mistreating them, or who may have mistreated them, or they just don't like them. But they still got to do what white people say. They still got to get up and go to work. They still got to obey the white people's laws. And if not, they get in trouble with white people. At least that has been my experience. Now, what I've just laid out, have you seen that? Does it make sense?
Makes a whole lot of sense, but Dr. Gus, I want to ask you a question. Okay, I asked you earlier, so far as about you said all white people are not racism.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. What I said was, you said that your daughter said that all white people are racist. And I just made a point of clarifying that I didn't say that. I said that I didn't disagree with her statement. But I just wanted to be clear that I didn't say that all white people are racist.
Can I ask you the question?
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you that question then?
Sure.
Do you think all white people are racist? Huh?
Do I think all white people are racist?
Yes.
I have to think here. I have to think. The reason I'm thinking is I'm thinking about whether or not I want to answer your question. My observation has been that for a lot of black people, vast majority of black people, it's very difficult to have honest dialogue about what it means to be a white person, and that we are very resistant, right? You said you have someone in your family. Is it your niece who's marrying a white person?
Yes.
Okay. And this is the second white. This isn't even the first time. This is the second white man that she's marrying. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Have you married a white person too? Have you ever married a white person?
Oh no, and I wouldn't.
Oh, okay. Why didn't you say she wouldn't? Okay. It's been my experience that many black people are very resistant to any sort of truthful dialogue or just truthful investigation about what it means to be a white person. So I don't try to press my views about what it means to be a white person too hard. What I generally do is ask people to think about that, because I found that it's difficult to get logical, calm dialogue about it. People tend to be very resistant and either accuse you of being racist, even though you're a black person and you don't have the power to be racist, or they just get angry and say, oh, well, you can't do that. You're making generalizations, and I know good white people. So I generally don't do that. But, we'll go a different route. We'll try a different route. I normally would not even get into all that with a black person. We would just have other dialogue. But you asked, I will answer your question. Yes, I do think that all white people are racist. And let me make sure I'm clear on this. When I say racist, because I don't know what you mean when you say racist, right? When I say racist, I mean a white person who consciously and or unconsciously, directly and or indirectly mistreats someone because they are not white. Very important. Definitions are incredibly important, because we don't have the same definition of racism. Because I remember I asked you before if a white person could be racist if they were friends with a black person, if they had sex with a black person, if they didn't throw that black person's change on the counter, if they spent a lot of time. Do you think it'd be possible for a white person to do all of that and to still be racist? And you said no. We don't have agreement there, because I have seen where it is possible. And I've heard white people where they have admitted, yes, I can do all of those things if I'm white and I can still be racist. My understanding, black people, we do not have a clear understanding of what it means to be a white person. We don't have a clear understanding of how racism, white supremacy works. We think it's just if racist is a Ku Klux Klan person, David Duke, or somebody with a swastika, that sort of thing. And that is not how racism, white supremacy works at all. That is the crudest, least effective form of racism. In my view, the most effective racism, white supremacy, the most effective way that white people go about doing that is when they have you convinced that they are not racist. That's when they're at their best at being able to practice racism, because you're not suspicious. You're just thinking, oh yeah, Susan is great. She's wonderful. Ronald, Roger, Nate, they're wonderful. We go out bowling every week. In fact, Nathan, he's going to be marrying my niece. He's awesome. He's definitely not a racist. In fact, if I went out somewhere and saw a racist, Nathan would be the first one to jump up and beat that racist down and tell him he's no good and get out of here. You're not going to mistreat any black people while I'm here. We would be convinced that Nate is the best in the world, and nothing could be further from the truth. We do not have an in-depth understanding of how all the many different ways that a white person can and does practice racism, white supremacy. And some of the best, well, I won't say best, but some of the most powerful, some of the most effective racist white supremacists, they would never hang out with the Klan. They wouldn't have a swastika. They might live next to black people. They might even marry a black person, have some quote unquote black friends, but they are doing major work to make sure that black people are struggling, having major problems, and being mistreated in all areas of people activity. You have tons of white people who are doing that every day, and I suspect one of them might be marrying your niece in a couple days.
Well, that's definitely something I disagree with you on.
Have you?
And another
I'm
question
sorry.
I
Go
want
ahead.
to ask you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Why would you not go to the wedding? You mentioned earlier that you wouldn't go to the wedding. You don't think it's a good thing, and my daughter is right. Why would you not go to the wedding?
I'm gonna break protocol. I just want to ask one question because I do think this is important. Have you spent some serious time thinking about researching, studying what racism is and how it works?
Well, actually, no, I haven't. To be honest, no.
Okay.
I haven't.
Okay. That I would say is very important. Very important because if we were talking about cars, if I had said, I've gone to school to study cars, I do this for a living. This is what I get up and do every day. I spend, more than 40 hours a week studying cars. Do you study cars?
No, I don't.
Okay. So if we were talking about cars, and if I, spent as much time as I spend talking about racism studying cars, there would be an acknowledged difference in expertise. It would be, hey, Gus, you study this. This is what you do for a living. So you know a lot more about that. So what I have to say on this would be given a little more weight than what you have to say, because this is not something that you study. It doesn't mean that I'm more intelligent than you. It just, well, actually, let me even take that back. Yes, it would. If we were talking about specifically cars, it would mean that, because I spend more time. I research this. I do this for a living. With racism, I study this. I spend a lot of time, years studying this. My program, I've talked to white people and non-white people from all over the world. The guest that we had on the program a couple days ago, she was from New Zealand. We've had people from New Zealand, Sweden, South Africa, Israel, France, Austria, Germany, Canada, all over the world to talk about racism, white supremacy, authors, scholars, filmmakers, the whole gambit. So, yeah, I would say that is huge in this conversation. You're talking to someone who has spent a lot of time studying and researching this. And if we were talking about cars, that would be acknowledged. Like, Gus, you have some expertise in this, so maybe I need to listen to what you say. It couldn't just be if I said, we were talking about cars, if I say, well, you should do this, you should get these tires because this would be the correct thing to do. It'll improve the efficiency of the car. You'll get better gas mileage. It couldn't just be, well, I don't agree with that. Even though I don't study this, I don't research cars, I don't spend any time studying cars, but I don't agree with what you said. That just wouldn't go. You wouldn't even do that. It would just be presumed you know what you're talking about. You study this, you do this for a living. It would just be assumed you probably know a little bit more about this than me. That generally doesn't happen in conversations on racism, but I do think that's important. Anywho, your question, you said you wanted to ask?
Okay, now that's something I do agree with you with, what you just said. Because I was going to ask you, where do you get your knowledge from? But you said you do a lot of studying and researching.
Exactly.
From where though?
Oh my goodness. As many places as possible. I try to talk to as many people as I can. You know what? I'll tell you. I have learned a lot from a number of people. Neely Fuller Jr., Dr. Marimba Ani. If you want some books that I would say, like, these are books that had the biggest impact on my understanding of racism, Neely Fuller Jr., his book, The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, that would be one. Dr. Marimba Ani, that's the study session, the program we're doing right now. Her book is Yurugu. It's an African-centered critique of European thought and behavior. And Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, her book, The ISIS Papers. Those three books, I would say, above and beyond any of the other material that I've read a lot of books, but those three books, I would say, had a huge impact on getting me to become less confused and to have a better grasp of what it means to be a white person and what racism, white supremacy is and how it works. Those three books for starters. But I have read a lot of other books. I have talked to a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of white people. I would say that's the other thing. I've talked to a lot of white people. And the vast majority of white people that I have talked to, they have confirmed a lot of the things that I'm saying. Either they've agreed to what I've said, right? Which just, hey, you got white people who will come and say a lot of the same thing. You got white people that have come on, vast majority, I think, of white people that have come on my program. They would tell you exactly what I'm saying, at least on the issue of can black people be racist. They would, knock that out in 5 minutes. Absolutely not. They might give different reasons. They might give different examples as to why a black person cannot be racist. But I can't even think of a white person that we've had on our program who would say, yeah, black people can be racist. I think pretty much all of them would say, no, that's not. And they might even laugh about that. Some of the white people that I've talked to, they would laugh at the idea of that. But even some of the white people who don't agree, and they don't agree with everything that I've said, but even then, they reveal a lot about what it means to be a white. I spend a lot of time talking to white. That would be another question I guess I would ask. Do you spend time talking to white people about racism?
No, I don't.
Okay. See, that would be another major gap in terms of expertise, right? So I spend a lot of time talking to white people about racism. And it's been white authors, white filmmakers, white professors at colleges. We've had white people who are professors at major universities from all over the world on the program. And I've talked to them about racism. Most of the white people have agreed with my definition of racism. Most of the white people would agree. White people have a lot more power than non-white people worldwide, and white people are doing things to make sure that that remains to be true forever. Most of the white, not all, but I think most of them would agree to that to some degree or another. Most of them would not say that all white people are racist, but even some of them would say that. Some of them would even say that. At the end of the day, I wrap all that. At the end of the day, I think talking to white people, you will start to understand a lot about racism. When you start to have conversations with white people and you start to notice patterns, things that they say, things that they don't say, things that make them upset, where they get emotional, where they get anxious, how they respond to certain questions, how they respond to you. If you're a black person and you say certain things, if you're a black person and you say, I don't think sexual intercourse is correct between white people and non-white people. Seeing how they respond to that, you'll learn a lot about white people. I think that's one of the things that we really don't do. We don't do enough of. We black people who are victims of racism, even black people who don't like white people, say that we don't like white people, say that we are angry with white people. We really don't spend time studying what it is that white people do. How it is that white people have continued to cause so many problems for us for so long. Like, this is not new. Black people have been complaining about white people for centuries. Like, this has been going on for a long time. And we really haven't stopped and taken time to study what is it exactly that they're doing? What is it exactly that we are not doing that keeps resulting in us generation after generation after generation having these complaints about being mistreated by white people? And I think that's something that's very important. I think more of us need to do. That's what I'm trying to do with this radio program. Get more of us to get a better understanding of what it means to be white and to be serious about studying white people, serious about studying how racism works and figuring out things we should be doing to neutralize the practice of racism, white supremacy. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I did want to bring to your attention that my daughter, she owned 2 of the books that you named.
Right. Which 2? Yurugu?
I can't pronounce the word.
Yurugu?
Yes, she definitely has that one and another one you named.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Maybe your daughter, I don't know, maybe you can get some of those books. And do you read? Do you spend any of your free time reading?
Yeah, yes, I do. Of course I do. Yeah.
Okay. Just asked. Maybe that would be great. I mean, I would really be touched. I don't have a lot of contact with black people, family members included, but I would feel wonderful if you and your daughter could maybe spend some time reading those books and talking about them. We could even have you all on the program. Like, I would be down. If you all would be down to do that, I would be down to have a whole program. You and your daughter, we could invite you two on the program to talk about some of the ideas in those books. Because I think at least one of them talks about why your daughter is not going to the wedding. At least in one, and maybe, well, at least one of those books, it gives a thorough explanation about why your daughter should not be attending that wedding and why she should be commended for not attending the wedding. But yeah, if you...
Isaac Paper? Is it Isaac Paper?
Oh no, it's Mr. Fuller's book. It's not in the ISIS paper. She doesn't really give a...
Oh, okay.
Mr. Fuller's book gives just a wonderful breakdown of why that is incorrect and why that is one of the worst things. Have you seen Monsters Ball? The film with Halle Berry?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my goodness.
Bits and pieces of it. I wasn't really interested after I seen the scenes he did. I just wasn't interested in.
Wow. What bothered you about that scene?
Well, her and the white guy, how she just sold herself to the white people by taking off all of her clothes and doing what she did. I think that was very inappropriate for somebody like Holly, for a black woman, period.
I understand. Do you know the guy that she had sex with, the character rather, in that film Monsters Ball, the white guy she was having sex with, that he called her husband, or excuse me, not her husband, but he called a black male a nigger earlier in that film before he had sex with Halle Berry. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
That would be an example, what I said earlier, when I said, do you think it's possible for a white person to be friends with a black person, to have sex with a black person, and still be a racist? And you said no, right?
Exactly.
Okay. I would point at that film and say, now you got an example right there of what I'm talking about. You got a white person who ends up having black friends, having sex with a black female, giving her a ride, ostensibly being quote unquote nice to a black person, but he's already called a black person a nigger. He's already, and he does some other thing. I'm not going to tell you the whole thing. He does some other things as well in the film that to me would just be blatant examples of this white guy is a racist white supremacist. I mean, it's blatant. It's undeniable. White people would say, this guy's a racist, but he's having sex with a black female. Watch that film. I would say watch that film and keep your niece's wedding in mind and your daughter's decision to not attend the wedding. Watch that film. Man, you should watch that film and come back and talk about what you thought about it on the program. That might be, you might have a whole new understanding about your daughter after you watch that film.
Wow.
And white people loved it. It got an Academy Award, right? Like white people said it was great. Halle Berry got an Oscar, remember?
Yes.
You should check that film out. You should. Can I ask? You said your niece. I'm sorry. Your niece married a white person before. Did she get divorced?
Yes, she did. Well, he ended up, cheating on her, from my understanding.
I'm sorry. Oh, he cheated on her.
Well, he did, from my understanding, yes.
Wow, that is interesting. That is interesting. Did she have any other comment, or do you know anything else where he might have mistreated her, this white guy that she used to be married to?
I don't know. I thought he was a pretty nice guy. Very nice.
White people are very good at that. That's been one of the things that I have learned. White people are very good at getting black people, victims of racism, white supremacy, to think that white people are nice, not racist. They're very good at that. And then what happens? Once we think they're nice, we're not suspicious, our guard is lowered, and it becomes very easy for them to mistreat us. Very easy. Because, hey, we think they're nice. We don't think they're racist. Wow, that is so fascinating. That is so fascinating. Let me see. I'm just double checking here because other people were on the line. Okay, I thought somebody, because we have people who listen to the program, and some of them, they have either been married to a white person or they have had non-white people in their family who have married white people, and it has not worked out well. Like it. They ended up finding out down the road that this white person was a racist. We've had a lot of people who've been in that situation. I didn't know if some of them, they might want to touch on that. But Yeah. I can even tell you a story. Like I said, I spent a lot of time studying this. I sat in on a class at the University of Washington. It was a so-called Asian American Studies class. I don't want you to think that white people just do this to black people. They do this to all non-white people. And we were talking about white people marrying non-white people. That's what the whole class was talking about. And there were stories after stories after stories of these so-called Asian people, non-white people, talking about their family members marrying a white person. And one that sticks out in my mind, it was Asian male. And he said that his sister, she was getting married to this white guy, and they were at the party for the wedding. The wedding was going to be the following day, and they were at the party the night before the wedding. And the white guy, he was with his white friends, and they were drinking. And, of course, they started telling racist jokes. Now, he's marrying a non-white person the next day, but they're sitting around telling racist jokes about non-white people. And his sister, or excuse me, the guy.
Sorry about that. My connection got dropped. Don't know what happened. Anyway.
Okay, that's okay.
So the guy that's telling this story, his sister is like, hey, your friends, they're telling these racist jokes. Please, get your friends. Stop them from telling these racist jokes. This is not cool. These white guys have been drinking, and her husband-to-be, they're getting married the next day, he yells at her, and ultimately he smacks her. This is the day before the wedding. So all this goes down. She's in tears. Everyone is all distraught. Horrible story. They go ahead and get married the next day. Now, I don't know. To me, I'll ask you, does that seem like, the behavior of a white person who's a racist?
Can you repeat that again?
Does that sound like the behavior of a white person who's racist?
Because he slapped her?
Any of it. Him smacking her, him telling these racist jokes with his friends, any of it.
Well, no, I wouldn't say. I don't think that's racist. Because black people tell jokes just like white people do.
Really?
Yes.
Do you know any racist jokes about white people, like jokes making fun of white people?
No, because I don't do stuff like that. No.
Oh, okay. This is another one. I ask a lot of white people around this. I don't think black people sit around and tell jokes making fun of white people. Nowhere close to the amount of white people who sit around and tell jokes about black people. It is unparalleled. And matter of fact, you can study, again, this is something I study. You can go online and look, you will find thousands, and I mean like tens of thousands of racist jokes where white people are making fun of black people. Tens of thousands of them. Violent, talking about, I can even tell you some. Let's see, I've asked white people to tell me some of these jokes. One of them was, President Obama is like an apple, how? And the punchline, they both look good hanging from a tree.
Wow.
Now, it's been my experience, white people have, like I said, tens of thousands of jokes like that. It's been my experience, black people do not sit around and tell jokes about white people like that. I don't ever remember a black person telling me a joke about Bill Clinton or George Bush or any of the Ronald Reagan, any of the white presidents making jokes about them being murdered. I don't remember any black people swapping jokes like that. White people swap racist jokes about President Obama all the time. White people have judges. There was a white judge who got in trouble. He had a T-shirt that had President Obama being shot on it. This is a judge. This is somebody who's supposed to be practicing administering justice who just got in trouble for this. And this is an everyday occurrence where someone is getting in trouble for making some sort of racist comment about President Obama and his wife and his children. I don't. I would just say, since we've said before, there's a difference in expertise on this subject. That I have not seen any evidence that there is anything comparable with regards to black people telling jokes about white people, with regards to how many times white people are telling racist jokes about black people. It's not even close. You might see on BET or some of the comedy networks black people saying things and being silly and making fun of white people. You might see that, right? But I mean in terms of just everyday conversation, white people, these are things white people do when we are not around. And I'm telling you, there is a stark difference in what white people are saying, what they are doing when we are not around. And that's something you would really have to do some serious studying. And it would have to be some studying with the suspicion that there may be something racist, white supremacist going on when you're not present as a black person. Because I'm telling you, there is a huge difference in the way white people function when we are not around. It's huge. And one of the big differences, those racist jokes come flying. I mean, woof. They are, I'm saying you can look on it. This is something you can do some investigating yourself. If you just put in racist jokes, right? If you do that, I guarantee you, you are going to be swamped with jokes directed at black people. Swamped. I mean, the disparity is going to be astronomical. I would say, I wouldn't even have a problem telling you a ratio of like 100 to 1. For every 100 racist jokes that you find making fun of black people, and generally a violent way, like when I told you about President Obama hanging from a tree, maybe you'll find one that's directed at a white person. I would say that, and that's probably a low estimate. I could probably even go up 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1. There are tons of these. You could not imagine how many of these white people have passed that. And that's one you could ask. I've done that. You could ask white people, hey, have you ever heard any racist jokes? And just see what they say. See if they're willing to share a few. If they say yes, and most of the white people that I've asked have said yes, see if they're willing to share a few. And then you can just compare. You said you've been around black people that said they don't like white people. Have they sat around and told jokes about white people?
I don't know about that.
Have you heard any?
No, but just the part of I don't agree with a black person calling a white person a nigger and they respond to it like it's something cute to be saying.
Say that one more time.
Okay. Black people be calling white people niggers, like, and white people respond to it like it's something cute to be saying. We were called niggers.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I have seen that. I have heard that. You have a lot of black people. That's one of the big things, you know, like when we've been, the whole conversation you and I have been having, I have concluded that you have a lot of black people who are very confused. We do not understand racism, white supremacy. We do not understand what it means to be a white person. And when you're confused about those two things, whoo, I mean, that is a quote from Mr. Fuller, the book I was recommending. That's on the first page of both of his books. If you do not understand racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. And I would say that is one of the most profound and accurate statements that I have heard, read in the time that I've been on the planet. And you have a lot of black people who do not understand what racism, white supremacy is. We don't even have a definition for it. And so when you are confused about that, it results in a lot of incorrect behavior, like us calling each other niggers, or even calling white people niggers. It really shows you how confused we have become, which, you know, I don't think is correct, but I do understand that's what happens when you get people that are confused. And the people who are most to blame for that would be white people, because I'm pretty sure black people were not running around calling each other niggers or anybody else niggers until racist white people showed up and decided that they were going to call us niggers. I'm real certain that's who we picked that up from, that we heard white people calling us nigger so much, we have just picked it up and started saying it a lot. And really what I've been saying, the amount or the frequency that you hear black people saying that word, that lets you know how often white people used to say that, because we're really just doing what they used to do.
Okay, I want to make another comment. would really, shock me. My daughter, because she really listens to your program and she get your books and she's really into it. She has a lot of knowledge, learned a lot of knowledge from listening to your program, and she be trying to give me that knowledge. But she came home one day and she said, Mom, I asked Nikki, this is her so-called white friend, so she said, I asked Nikki, what do white people talk about when black people is not around? And I was like, wow, Tanisha, why would you say something like that? And she said that her girlfriend just paused. She paused, and I asked her, I said, wow, she should have asked you, what do black people talk about when white people not around? So I didn't think that was something very smart that she said to her so-called white friend, as she said. So what do you think about that?
Wow, your daughter sounds very codified. She sounds like she sounds a lot less confused about racism, white supremacy, and what's happening on the planet.
Wow.
I would say that's a phenomenal question. I think that is a phenomenal question that black people can, and particularly if it is your so-called white friend, that is a wonderful question to ask. Because, as I said, there's an astronomical difference between what white people talk about when black people are present and what white people talk about when black people are not around. It is an astronomical difference. And if that's your friend, this wasn't a stranger. I could see maybe if she was just asking some strange white person on the street that she's never met before. But if they're friends, what's the big deal? We're friends. We hang out. You're white. What do you talk about when it's no black people? I don't see where that should be a problem. I don't see why she should have been offended. Answer the question. We talk about.
Very offended.
I'm sorry?
Very offended.
Why should she be offended?
Because from being friends and for her to just say something like that out the blue, I would have been offended too. As a black person, if I was there, as being her mother.
Fascinating. Why would you have been offended if you had
because,
just been a black?
Why would you even say something like that? Out the blue.
I would say that question doesn't come out of the blue. Context. That question doesn't come out of the blue. That sort of question comes from the mind of someone who understands that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and that it means something to be a white person on a planet dominated by racism. It means something. And that there tends to be a difference in what white people say and do when black people are not around. And that difference is important enough that if you are white and you are my friend, you shouldn't have a problem answering that question. I have asked many white people that question. That question has been asked on this program many times. And I can tell you, white people who say that they're honest, right, say that they're honest and or say that they are trying, at least, they allege to be trying to work against racism, they have no problem answering that question. Even some white people who have admitted to being racist have had no problem answering that question. From absolute strangers, people that they don't know from Adam, they've answered that question honestly and told, and unfortunately they had to admit many times racist comments are being made. Many times when there are no black people around, things are being said that are derogatory about black people. Racist jokes or just comments where other white people assume that if you are white, you are racist. That has happened on this program more than once. So I can say and I've asked white people that I don't know. I've asked white people that are not my so-called friends. So my view would be that if it's a white person who says we're friends, they have no reason to be upset. They would have no reason to be offended. I don't see anything incorrect about it, particularly if they're friends. No reason at all. I think it's fantastic. And what's more important than anything, did she answer the question? You said she paused, and what was the response? Did she answer the question, or did she just pause and not answer it?
She never did answer. I believe she told me she never answered the question.
Very revealing. Very revealing. White people, that's a pattern. I would say to notice that. If you do the study session, if you can kind of do some reading material with your daughter, paying attention to when white people decline to answer your question. Very important pattern to pick up on when they decide that they're not going to answer your question, they're not going to give you information. Very important to pick up on that. But yeah, I would say if anything, if I was your daughter, I would be offended. We're supposed to be friends. We kick it, we hang out, and you can't answer my little question about, what do white people talk about when it's no black people? I mean, if it's nothing said offensive, then you just answer the question. Hey, we don't, we talk about the same thing that we talk about when I'm with you. We talk about the weather, what we're going to eat, what we're going to do for the weekend, blah, blah, blah. I mean, same thing I talk about with you. If that's what it is, why would I be offended? Why would I even need to think? If you ask me, what do you talk about when I'm not around? Same thing I was talking about when you got here, racism.
Well, my daughter was pretty much offended. She came home and I said, well, invite Nikki to the baby shower, and for my other daughter, and she said, no, me and Nikki, we're not speaking right now. Both of us are mad at each other for a statement that I made. She said, no, we're not talking. Because so she just assumed she do talk about black people in her mind.
That's smart. If they don't, it would be no reason to not answer the question. You just answer the question. We talk about normal stuff that we talk about. Same thing I talk about when I'm with you, and move forward. So, yeah, I think your daughter, I agree with her conclusion, her suspicions about that. Very interesting. Wow. Would you be interested, in doing the reading session with your daughter on some of the books? Okay. If you all can kind of pick a date, I don't want to rush you off, but I mean, we could even divide it up. You can read, the first 50, 100 pages of Dr. Welsing's book. It would be great if you could get Mr. Fuller's book too. But yeah, if you want to read maybe the first 100 pages or so, and then we can get you and your daughter on the program, that would be phenomenal. That would make me feel really good. If, maybe you can get a better understanding of what your daughter is saying. And you said you don't study racism, so maybe if you start to study racism and get a better understanding of what racism is and how it works, maybe you'll get a better understanding on why your daughter asked her so-called white friend that question, why she doesn't want to go to the wedding, some of the statements that I've been at, why it's impossible for a black person to be racist. Maybe you'll get a better understanding on that. That's great. I guess I'm trying to see about coordinating a date and time. What your daughter or whomever, is your daughter listening to all this right now? Does she know you called me?
No, she's not listening at this time. But earlier she had wanted me. She's always trying to get me to listen to your program all the time. And I always tell her, some other time I'm busy. But for some reason tonight, she wanted me to call in. And I just thought I decided to hear, exactly what's going on, where she getting her knowledge from. And it seems, pretty much legit, I kind of understand and a little. Okay.
Well, but hey, I am still learning. I am not, an expert on anything, although I do, I think it would be correct to say I think I have more expertise on this subject matter because I spent a lot of time studying it. But I'm still learning. I think people who listen to the program would say they also are still learning. But, yeah, I would love to do that, to have you and your daughter on the program to kind of talk more about it. And if you all are going to read maybe some of Dr. Wells, you can read some of that together and, kind of see what you think about it, if it makes sense, if you have a better grasp. I think that would be phenomenal. Do you do email?
Yes, I do email. Yes, I do.
Okay. I can give you my email address, and you can just shoot me an email, and we can try to set up a date and time for the program to kind of go over the first few pages of Dr. Welding.
I'm sorry, but I believe my daughter do have your email because she's always on point, with your discussions all the time. She's not here at this time, but I'm quite sure she have your email address.
Okay.
She told me tonight it was a book session tonight, and she just wanted me to try to see if I can get through. And I'm like really shocked, and she won't believe it when she get home when I tell her I was able to get through.
Oh, she'll have a hoot, I'm sure, when she listens to the program. I'm sure she'll get a big kick out of that. That'll be, she'll listen, daughter.
Definitely. Yes, definitely.
Daughter, when you hear this, shoot me your email, and, Mom said she's down. She said she'd be down to do the program and do, like, the first 100 pages of Dr. Welsing's book, so we can do it this month. I have that book here. I'm pretty familiar with that, so we could do it sometime around the end of June. That way you still have a week and a half or so, or I guess about a week at this point. You still have about a week or so to get through the first 100. So, daughter, if you have my email, it's untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. Shoot me an email, and, we'll set up a date and time to do the program. I think that would be great. I think that would hopefully encourage some of our other listeners to make an effort to get some of their family members who might be a little confused about what racism is and how it works, to try to share some of that information. And patience from the chat room said they don't have the patience to talk to non-white people who are confused. I think we're going to need some patience to get this problem. Patience with non-white people, make sure I'm being clear. I think we're going to need a lot of patience with other victims and patience with ourselves. You got to be patient with yourself and other victims, because white people have done some damage to us, like big time. I would really, that would be great. I'm glad you were able to call through. That was great. I hope your daughter is going to get a kick out.
That's funny.
You should email me either way, daughter, when you hear this, what your thoughts were, feedback on the dialogue with your mom, since we spent a nice chunk of the broadcast.
Definitely. I really did. I'm looking at the clock.
That'll be a hoot. Yeah, shoot me an email, daughter. We can chat it up. I'll be real curious to hear more info about, what's going on and your thoughts on the call. And then, we can set up the program as well. Wow. It has been a hoot. I have enjoyed it. I don't even like talking to people, but it has been quite enjoyable.
Definitely. Same here. Definitely.
I will hear from your daughter, and as soon as she contacts me, we'll set up everything and get the date and time so we can make that program. I'm pretty certain a lot of listeners will get a kick out of hearing both of you all on the program, too, because I can tell you a lot of our listeners, they're in the same boat as your daughter, where they start to study this information and get less confused, but their family members don't study this information, and so it becomes difficult to be on the same page when talking with family, brothers, parents, even children, I think, sometimes. So I think a lot of our listeners are in the same boat as you all. So I think it'll be great to maybe kind of give them some pointers on things that they can do to try to share some of this information with family members, because I can't think of anything better. You start to get family members on the same page about racism. That is the best thing in the world. Cool. Did you have anything else you wanted to get in before we wrap up? We pretty much did overtime on our program, but did you have anything you wanted to share before we conclude?
No. I'll just wait for our date when I email you and let you know exactly when we're going to get on the broadcast and talk with you.
Okay. It'll be up to your daughter. She has the email, untiljustice@gmail.com. As soon as I hear from her, I will contact her, and we will make it happen. I'm excited. I'll be looking to do it as soon as possible. So, soon just tell your daughter, shoot me an email, and as soon as she does so, we'll hop on it.
Sounds good.
I hope folks listening in, I hope this was of some constructive value. We diverted from our Urugu session, but not too much. I think this is still still along the same lines pretty much. Yeah, we can even chat about it tomorrow on the pro. You should listen to the call-in tomorrow, because that's what the program tomorrow is all set up. You should listen into that. The call-in tomorrow is at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. That's when we just encourage non-white people who listen to call in, share their views, observations, things that they've been seeing. We kind of look at some of the news, more recent news reports that have been happening in the last week, and just other things that have been happening related to racism, white supremacy. It tends to be a lot of people call in. We people from all over the world. Last week we had people calling in from London as well. So yeah, you should, if you want to listen or call in, that would be great. Hear some feedback from some of the other folks for tomorrow. It's at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Pacific. Tomorrow evening, hopefully we'll get folks to dial in and share their views. And we'll be back Sunday as well. Cisco Street Love will be with us to discuss the Atlanta child murders, so-called Atlanta child murders, Wayne Williams case back in the 80s. Updating with the whole Sandusky. I think the verdict came out while we were on the air live this evening. Well, not the verdict, but I think they reached a decision in the Sandusky case. I don't think they've given the verdict out, but yeah. The plantation continues to roll. Thanks to everybody for participating. Hope it was a constructive use of your Friday evening. Thank you, Mother, for dialing into the program.
Thank you,
really enjoyed
and you
it.
have a nice night. Thank you, and you have a nice night.
I will do so. You do the same.
Thank
we'll be
you.
back tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for
Okay.
listening in. Invest in the program if you think it's constructive, and we will see everybody tomorrow evening. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thank you all.